There's a particular kind of tiredness you get late at night, the kind where you don't really want to do anything, but you can't quite fall asleep yet. You need something, not a film because that requires decisions, not music because music can pull you the wrong way, either too sad or too energetic. What you need is a voice, a familiar one, talking about something that doesn't require you to do anything with it. King of the Hill is perfect for this. It is a show about a propane salesman in suburban Texas who has very strong opinions about lawn care. His neighbors have opinions about conspiracy theories and divorce and the correct way to season a brisket. Nothing blows up. Well, one thing blows up, but that's one episode out of 269, and we'll get to it eventually. The point is, nothing grand happens. An entire episode can revolve around Hank trying to source the right kind of dirt for his lawn. An entire episode. King of the Hill episodes are approximately 22 minutes long. Dirt. And it works. I find that remarkable, honestly, that someone looked at a middle-aged man's relationship with his lawn and thought, yes, this is television, and then made it genuinely compelling. What we're doing tonight, or this morning, or whatever time it is wherever you are, is just wandering through that world. The world of AR-Len, Texas. We'll talk about who these people are, where they came from, what makes them interesting. Some of it you'll know already if you've watched the show. Some of it goes a bit deeper. We'll cover the creation of the show, the physical world of AR-Len, every major character with a bit of depth, some specific episodes worth dwelling on, the show's legacy, and what happened when it came back in 2025 after 15 years away. There's no particular order in which any of this needs to matter. It all just sits next to itself, the way the show itself does. None of it is urgent. We're not building to anything. If you fall asleep somewhere around section 5, that's genuinely the goal. The lore will still be here when you come back. I'll mention once, briefly, that a subscribe helps if you're enjoying this kind of content. The algorithm is a peculiar thing and it responds to that sort of gesture, but I won't mention it again. So, King of the Hill, 13 seasons on Fox, a handful of final episodes that slipped out in syndication around 2010, and then many years of nothing, followed by a well-received return on Hulu in the mid-2020s that apparently got strong streaming numbers in its first few months, which is a genuinely astonishing number for a show about propane. It's one of the more quietly kind pieces of television ever made. Not in a saccharine way, not in the way that announces its kindness, just honestly, matter-of-factly affectionate toward the people it depicts. Hank Hill is conservative and repressed and occasionally wrong about important things, and the show never mocks him for it. It just shows him. Bill D.O.H. Treve is depressed in a way that a lot of comedies would play purely for laughs, and King of the Hill does laugh, but it also just lets him be sad. There's a compassion in the show's eye that I find hard to articulate but easy to feel. Anyway, let's start at the beginning, which is more or less a suburb of Dallas in the mid-90s. And a man named Mike Judge, who had recently finished doing something very different with cartoon teenagers and a television set. Mike Judge lived for a time in Garland, Texas. If you know anything about the Dallas metro area, you know that Garland is very much a specific kind of suburb. Not the glamorous part of the metroplex, not the part people put on postcards. It's medium density, middle class, full of strip malls and churches and houses with decent lawns that their owners feel strongly about. It's the kind of place that most TV writers would look at and see very little worth dramatizing. Judge looked at it and saw the whole show. He'd been working on Beavis and Butthead for a few years by the mid-90s, which, if you haven't seen it, is about as opposite from King of the Hill as animation gets. Two teenagers in Highland, Texas who watch music videos and say horrible things and occasionally set fire to things. It was wild and transgressive and genuinely very funny in its own strange way. But somewhere in the middle of making it, Judge started thinking about a different kind of character. The character he kept coming back to was essentially the neighbor of Beavis and Butthead, Tom Anderson. Hank Hill is a middle-aged Texan homeowner, responsible, earnest, a little baffled by everything around him. Judge had voiced Tom Anderson himself, and there was something in that voice, a particular quality of American male dignity, a man who takes things seriously even when the things are not that serious, that he wanted to build a whole show around. So he did. He drew the main characters, developed the show's concept, and pitched the idea to Fox. Fox paired him with Greg Daniels. This is worth dwelling on for a moment because the Daniels partnership is genuinely significant. Daniels came from The Simpsons, he'd been a writer and producer there, and he brought with him a very different set of instincts than Judge. Where Judge was primarily interested in socio-political humor in the collision between Hank's particular worldview and the modern world around him, Daniels was interested in character, in emotional architecture, in making sure that the comedy had something underneath it that would make you actually care about these people. They were a good match, even if they came at things differently. And Daniels' contribution to the pilot and early seasons was substantial. He essentially created two of the show's most important characters from scratch. Lou Ann Platt, Hank's niece, the young woman from a broken home who ends up living in the Hill household, wasn't in Judge's original draft. Cotton Hill wasn't in Judge's original draft. Two characters who would end up defining enormous amounts of the show's emotional range. Both came from Daniels. He also turned Dale Gribb Bull into a conspiracy theorist. In Judge's original conception, Dale was more of a standard alley neighbor, a generic supporting character. It was Daniels who suggested making him paranoid and conspiratorial, the man who believes the government is monitoring him, who uses a fake alias, who suspects everyone of working against him while somehow missing the one actual secret unfolding in his own home. That creative decision gave the show one of its most enduring comic engines. Judge was so genuinely pleased with what Daniels brought that Daniels is officially credited alongside him as a co-creator of the show. That's a fairly uncommon generosity in television, and it speaks well of both of them. The show premiered on January 12, 1997 on Fox, and almost immediately it was a success. That first full season, King of the Hill nearly outrated The Simpsons, which was, in 1997, still a genuinely powerful cultural institution. KOT averaged around 16 million viewers per episode and finished the year ranked 15th in the United States by overall viewership. For a cartoon about a propane salesman with mild emotional repression, that's remarkable. What they'd made was clearly resonating with people. The question was whether Fox understood what they had. Fox had a policy at the time: no character development, no story arcs, episodes self-contained for syndication. Judge and Daniels quietly worked around this anyway, smuggling character growth in through accumulation of small details rather than dramatic arcs. The constraint arguably made them better. Quiet growth is more true to life than the announced kind. The creative tension between Judge and Daniels is worth understanding because it shapes the show's whole personality. John Alschuler and Dave Krinsky, who'd worked on the series from season 2, took over the running of the show from season 7 onwards. And there's a broadly acknowledged shift in the later seasons toward broader comedy and away from the more grounded, character-driven episodes of the early years. Different people have different opinions about this. Personally, I think the first 5 or 6 seasons are the show's best, but there's good work throughout. In terms of the production, the show was made by Judge's company and Fox's animation arm, and it chugged along, winning 2 Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Animated Program along the way until 2009 when Fox canceled it. The Cleveland show was fine. It was not particularly memorable. The decision to cancel King of the Hill in its favor has aged rather badly. The last 4 episodes of the original run aired in syndication in May 2010, with the technical series finale being Just Another Manic Con Day and To Sirloin with Love, serving as the intended Fox ending, and then King of the Hill went into what turned out to be about a 13 to 14 year hibernation. During that time, something interesting happened. Streaming and syndication gave the show a new audience. People who'd been too young to watch it first time around found it on Netflix and later Hulu, and discovered that it held up, that the comedy was still funny, that the characters were richer than they'd expected, that there was something genuinely warm in it. The show built a passionate secondary audience that in some ways exceeded the cultural conversation it had generated during its original run. Mike Judge has mentioned that a 20th anniversary table read at SF Sketchfest in 2017, where they performed the episode Husky Bobby in front of a live audience, was the moment he and Daniels started seriously thinking that a revival might work. The audience's reaction was electric. People weren't just nostalgic, they were actually invested. Fox wasn't interested when they pitched it to them. But Hulu was expanding its slate of adult animated series, and eventually the momentum grew enough for it to pick up the King of the Hill revival. In January 2023, a revival was officially ordered. It took another 2.5 years to actually make it to air, slowed partly by the WGA strike of 2023, but on August 4, 2025, King of the Hill was back. All 10 episodes of Season 14 dropped on Hulu at once. We'll talk about what happened in that season later on, near the end of this. There's a lot to cover first. But the thing I want you to hold on to from this section is that the show's creation was essentially the product of two very specific things colliding. Mike Judge's personal familiarity with the texture of suburban Texas life, and Greg Daniels' understanding of how to build characters that people would actually care about across years of watching. Neither of those things alone would have made King of the Hill. Together, they made something rather special. And it started in Garland, Texas, which I find sort of perfect. The most unassuming possible origin for a show that turned out to matter quite a lot. There's another dimension to the show's creation that I think is worth mentioning, which is what it was like for Mike Judge to be making Beavis and Butthead and then pivot to something this grounded. Beavis and Butthead was genuinely transgressive for its era. It got congressional attention, it got parents writing angry letters, it got people on television worrying about the moral fiber of American youth in a way that now reads as rather quaint. Judge went from that to a show where a major source of comedy is a middle-aged man buying the wrong kind of fertilizer for his lawn. He's spoken about how King of the Hill grew out of his time on Beavis and Butthead and a desire to tell more grounded stories rather than being an explicit reaction to it. Not a rejection of it, but a different impulse. He was interested in a character who was earnest rather than nihilistic, who had genuine values, even if those values were sometimes limiting, who cared about doing things right and found meaning in ordinary work. Hank Hill is, in a lot of ways, what Tom Anderson from Beavis and Butthead would have been if he'd been the protagonist of his own story rather than the butt of someone else's joke. Judge has acknowledged this connection himself. The voice is similar, the demeanor is similar. The core DNA is the same man with more complexity and more compassion. The other thing Judge wanted to do, and this is something he's talked about in various interviews over the years, was make a show that treated its setting with respect. He grew up in that Texas suburb. He knew those streets and those strip malls and those backyard gatherings, and he didn't want to make a show that looked at them from the outside with condescension or mockery. The comedy in King of the Hill never comes from the premise that suburban Texas is inherently ridiculous. It comes from the specific people and their specific situations. That distinction matters enormously for how the show feels to watch. There's a line that got attached to the early marketing. Andy Griffith is back and he's pissed. Greg Daniels mentioned this in an interview about the revival, and it captures something real about the show's orientation. Andy Griffith, the warm, wise, community-centered paternal figure. Except Hank is a bit frustrated by the world and a bit confused by it, and a bit more likely to go very still and say, "I tell you what," in a tone that suggests he is containing significant distress. But the underlying posture is the same. This is a man who wants things to be right and keeps finding that the world doesn't quite cooperate. Daniels also said in that same interview that one of the things they liked about the revival's premise, Hank and Peggy, returning from years of work at an oil company base in Saudi Arabia, was that the Saudi base had been essentially a perfect preserved version of American suburban life, artificially maintained, comfortable and familiar. And then they come home to the actual AR Len, which has changed, which is different, which is messier than the version they've been living in. That gap between the idealized version of a place and the real one is very much King of the Hill's emotional territory. But all of that comes later. For now, the show was conceived, it was shaped by two people with complementary and occasionally competing instincts, and it became something that people cared about far more than a show about a propane salesman had any obvious right to expect. The Spike Lee connection to the show's creation is something I find genuinely interesting, and it doesn't get mentioned enough. Judge has mentioned in interviews that Do the Right Thing was an influence on his thinking about what King of the Hill could be. Not in tone, the two things are obviously very different, but in the sense of, here's a film that takes a specific community seriously, that depicts a specific place with real people who have real specificity to them, and that trusts the audience to inhabit that world rather than observe it from outside. That aspiration to make something that felt true to a specific place rather than generically American is audible in the final product. The first season is also worth a specific mention because it establishes a template that the show maintains remarkably consistently across its whole run. The pilot introduces Hank and Peggy and Bobby and the Alley Guys and Luann and the neighborhood in about 22 minutes, and it does it without rushing. It establishes who these people are through behavior rather than exposition. Hank doesn't explain himself, he just acts like Hank, and the show trusts you to understand who he is from watching him act like Hank. That pilot also includes the running visual joke that Cotton, who exists at this point only in references from Hank, has already developed a mythological quality before you've seen him. Hank talks about his father the way people talk about forces of nature. The payoff, when Cotton physically arrives in episode 8 and rides a rented horse into Bobby's birthday party, is one of the season's best moments precisely because the show has spent 7 episodes making Cotton enormous in Hank's psyche, before ever making him real. The first season as a whole is the show finding its register, and it finds it quite quickly. By episode 4 or 5, you have a reasonably clear sense of what this is going to be, which is not always the case with television comedy. That's A.R. Len in the making. Now let's talk about what A.R. Len actually looks like. Start with the alley. 4 men standing in the space between their houses, holding cans of Alamo beer, not entirely saying anything. That image, that specific, unremarkable image, is basically the show in microcosm. The alley is just a patch of concrete between 2 rows of modest suburban houses. There's a fence, there's sometimes a folding chair, there's the suggestion of a lawnmower or a bin somewhere in the background. Nothing about it should be interesting, and yet it is the most important location in all of King of the Hill. More important than Strickland Propane, more important than Tom Landry Middle School, more important than the living room of 123 Rainy Street. The alley is where the show's emotional engine runs. We'll talk more about it when we get to the alley guys themselves, but I wanted to mention it first because it sets the tone for everything else about A.R. Len. This is a show whose most meaningful space is a bit of concrete between houses. That tells you what you need to know. The full address is 123 Rainy Street, A.R. Len, Texas. The Hills have lived there for most of their adult lives. The neighborhood is the kind of established middle-class suburb where you know all your neighbors, you have opinions about their lawns, and whether or not someone has a boat in their driveway is a subject of mild community drama. It feels lived in. It feels specific in the way that real places are specific rather than the way that TV sets are specific. Strickland Propane is where Hank works. It's a small to medium propane company run by Buck Strickland, a man we'll get to properly later, but who can be summarized for now as morally compromised, physically deteriorating, deeply reliant on Hank, and intermittently terrible to him. The business itself is depicted with remarkable accuracy for an animated comedy. There are actual propane industry details in this show. Hank talks about BTU ratings and propane storage and the relative merits of propane versus charcoal with a level of specificity that suggests the writers did some research, or at least that Mike Judge knew some propane people. The Low Mart is AR Len's equivalent of Walmart, a big box store. The show has a complicated relationship with it. Hank resents it for undercutting local businesses and for representing a kind of commercial homogenization of American suburban life, and yet eventually ends up working there after Strickland Propane shuts down, which is a fairly honest depiction of how most people relate to that kind of store. The Low Mart becomes briefly significant in season 2 when it explodes and kills Luann's boyfriend Buckley, but we'll get to that. Tom Landry Middle School is where Bobby and later Connie and Joseph go to school. It's named after Tom Landry, the former head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, which is exactly the kind of real-world AR Len-coded detail that the show does well. The school's mascot is a longhorn steer in the manner of the University of Texas Longhorns. The principal is a man named Moss, who Hank has a complicated working relationship with across the series. There are various other AR Len institutions worth knowing about. The AR Len Bystander is the local newspaper where Peggy publishes her column Musings of Peg E. Hill, which is read with the enthusiasm that local newspaper columns reliably inspire. Channel 84 is the local news station where Nancy Gribb Bull works as a meteorologist and later anchor. The VFW building, the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post, is Cotton Hill's domain, a place where old men gather to relitigate World War II and drink and argue about things. The Nine Rivers Country Club is the local country club, which has the interesting distinction of having an almost exclusively all-Asian membership, a detail the show presents without commentary and which functions as a quiet bit of satire about who actually has the accumulated wealth in suburban Texas. Tom's Rhineland is a bar the alley guys occasionally frequent. Luli's is the local restaurant, a clear parody of Luby's, a very Texas cafeteria chain. There's a Bazoom's, which is a parody of Hooters. These details build up into a coherent geography, a place you feel like you could navigate even if you've never been to a real suburb like this. The show also has an interesting recurring geography around the country as the Hills travel occasionally. They go to Montana, they go to Austin, they go to Dallas proper. And in each of these episodes, AR Len is implicitly the reference point against which other places are measured. AR Len is a bit small, a bit conventional, a bit behind the times, but it's also safe and familiar and honest. The show is consistently clear about this trade-off without being sentimental about it. What I find most impressive about the world of AR Len is that it never feels like a cartoon city. It doesn't have the deliberately vague geography of Springfield from The Simpsons, which can be anywhere in America depending on what the episode needs. AR Len is specifically Texan. The heat, the landscape, the particular quality of the social conservatism, the way people relate to churches and football and guns, it's grounded in a way that makes the comedy more specific and therefore, in a funny way, more universal, because when something is real enough, it stops being a generalization and becomes something anyone can recognize. One detail I always like: the Sufanusen phones. The Hills' Laotian American neighbors want to get into the Nine Rivers Country Club. In one episode, it appears they've been accepted, and then in subsequent episodes, they're still living next door to the Hills on Rainy Street. Whether this is a continuity error or a quiet implication that their acceptance didn't work out the way they hoped is never clarified. I prefer to think it's the latter because it's the more honest answer. The fictional Alamo beer, the show's stand-in for a generic Texas domestic lager, the kind men drink in alleys on warm evenings, became real in 2025. When the revival was announced for Hulu, Hulu partnered with the actual Alamo Beer Company out of San Antonio to produce a King of the Hill branded Alamo beer. It launched in Texas first, then the rest of the United States. I find this sort of beautiful, The beer that never existed being made real because the show that depicted it turned out to matter to people. There's something quite right about that. A.R. Len also runs on a very specific social physics. The show understands suburban Texas masculine social codes extremely well. The way that men of a certain generation express care through proximity rather than words. The way that help is offered in practical terms rather than emotional ones. The way that community is maintained through accumulated small acts of reliability rather than any single grand gesture. Hank will mow a neighbor's lawn without being asked. He will stay and help with a fence post at 6 in the evening after a long day of work. He will not, generally speaking, say anything about his feelings. The show frames all of this as both limiting and genuine, and it manages to hold those two things at once without being condescending about either. That balance, affectionate without being uncritical, funny without being cruel, is what A.R. Len is. The whole town is built on it. And at the center of the town, at the center of everything, is the man whose name is in the title. There's something else about the geography of A.R. Len that I want to mention, which is how the show uses its physical spaces to communicate character. This might sound like a slightly academic observation, but bear with me because it actually affects how you watch the show. Hank's relationship to his house and his lawn is not just comedy material, it's character expression. Hank does not have a lot of outlets for the pride and care he feels about the world. He can't easily talk about his feelings. He can't easily say, "I love you," or "this matters to me," in the direct way that modern therapeutic culture would recommend. But he can have an immaculate lawn. He can maintain his truck in working condition. He can keep his house in a state that communicates to anyone who can read the code that the person who lives here takes things seriously and cares about how things are. When Hank's lawn deteriorates in the course of an episode, it's a reliable signal that Hank's world is under some kind of stress. When he restores it, you feel something like relief. The lawn is a barometer. Similarly, the alley functions as a pressure valve. Whatever has happened in the episode, whatever conflict or embarrassment or confusion has accumulated, the alley is where it gets released. Not through talking about it, necessarily. Through standing near the people you trust, drinking something cold, and existing in proximity to people who will still be there tomorrow. The alley is the show's argument for a particular kind of friendship that doesn't announce itself but also doesn't dissolve. The interior of the Hill house is another interesting space. Peggy's domain, more than Hank's, she runs a household with a certain confident authority that Hank occasionally pushes back against and mostly defers to. Bobby's room has the particular chaos of a 13-year-old who has unusual interest in comedy and performance. The kitchen is where Peggy cooks her signature Brown Betty, which I believe is a kind of fruit crumble, and where family dynamics play out over breakfast in a way that the show finds endlessly productive. Strict land propane is, in an odd way, also a sanctuary for Hank. There are episodes that make this explicit, Moving On Up and Chasing Bobby being the ones usually mentioned, where Hank retreats to lawn work and to his truck when his home life becomes overwhelming. His desk at Strict Land Propane, his knowledge of the stock and the tanks and the client relationships, his solid professional competence, these are things that are unambiguously his in a way that the rest of his life sometimes isn't. He is absolutely, without question, good at his job. And in a show full of characters who are sometimes not entirely sure what they're good at, that clarity has a real weight. The fictional A.R. Len exists in relationship to the real Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in an interesting way. The city is always nearby. Characters drive to Dallas for things they can't get in A.R. Len. There are references to Fort Worth. There's a general sense of A.R. Len as one of many such suburbs radiating out from the core of the Metroplex. But Dallas proper is largely absent from the show's visual world. A.R. Len is the world. Dallas is where you go when you need something that A.R. Len doesn't have, which, in the show's telling, is not always a good thing. This is, I think, a very honest depiction of how people who live in places like A.R. Len relate to nearby cities. The city is convenient and occasionally fun and also kind of overwhelming and not entirely the point. The point is the house on Rainy Street and the alley and the people you've known for 30 years who will stand next to you when things are going wrong, even if neither of you mentions that things are going wrong. The show's geography is also carefully managed in terms of what's visible and what isn't. We see the interior of Strick Land Propane regularly, Hank's desk, the storage yard, the basic infrastructure of a small propane business. We see the Hill House from both inside and outside with real consistency. The alley appears so often that you develop a mental map of where it sits in relation to the houses around it. But AR Len itself, the wider city, remains partially sketched, introduced when episodes need it and otherwise left off screen. This is a deliberate choice, I think, and it's the right one. The show is not about AR Len as a city, it's about a specific patch of AR Len. The neighborhood, the street, the alley. Making the wider city too concrete would push the focus outward when everything that matters is in this small radius. The Hills' world is small because their lives are structured around small things, and the show honors that by keeping the geography proportional. There is also the question of weather, which sounds minor but isn't. AR Len is hot. The show communicates this without ever making it a dramatic point. It's just the background condition, the reason why standing in an alley in the evening with a cold beer is pleasant rather than something you need to explain. The Texas heat is the climate in which the show lives. It shapes the pace of things, the outdoor quality of the social life, the particular pleasure of air conditioning and of cold beverages, its texture, and it's consistent. The businesses of AR Len also accumulate into a coherent economic picture. Strickland Propane is a small business with a modest payroll. The sports bar is a neighborhood bar where nothing dramatic happens. Luli's is a cafeteria-style restaurant, the kind of place that exists in actual Texas cities and that most TV shows have no interest in depicting because it's not aspirational. The Meg, a low mart, is where everyone shops, even though everyone resents it. These businesses together sketch an economy that matches the characters' incomes and lives. That's AR Len. Now let's talk about the man at its center. The most important thing to understand about Hank Hill's relationship with propane is that it is sincere. I want to say that clearly because it's easy to watch the show and assume that Hank's passion for propane is a running joke, that the comedy comes from a man who is inexplicably devoted to a fuel source. And yes, there is comedy in it, but the comedy coexists with something real. Hank Hill genuinely believes that propane is superior to charcoal for grilling, and that clean-burning efficient fuel matters, and that his work selling it is meaningful. He is a man who has found his calling, and it happens to be propane, and the show treats this with the same respect it would treat any vocation that a person cares about deeply. His full name is Hank Rutherford Hill. He is the assistant manager of Strick Land Propane, a position he has held for years, and one that contains a quiet tragedy. He is not the manager, he is the assistant manager. He is, by every observable measure, the person who actually keeps the business running, and yet the full title has not come to him. He doesn't complain about this, he just keeps showing up. Mike Judge voices Hank, and Tom Anderson from Beavis and Butthead is widely regarded as the prototype and inspiration for Hank, a middle-aged Texas homeowner, dignified, earnest, a bit baffled by the world around him. The voice is similar, the posture is similar. But where Tom Anderson was a peripheral figure, the butt of someone else's joke, Hank is a protagonist, and that changes everything. When you're at the center of the story, your worldview gets taken seriously even when it's wrong. And Hank's worldview is frequently wrong, and the show knows this, and it's also frequently right, and the show knows that too. This is what distinguishes the show from a lot of political cultural satire. Hank is a social conservative. He is uncomfortable with anything he perceives as unconventional. He is suspicious of change. He has strong opinions about appropriate gender roles and appropriate uses of public spaces, and appropriate ways to conduct yourself in various social situations. These opinions sometimes harm the people he loves, but he is also honest. He is loyal. He is genuinely kind in the way that quiet, reliable people are kind, not through grand gestures, but through sustained presence. He will not say cruel things. He will not betray a confidence. He will show up when he's needed. He will do the job he said he'd do. And he will treat people with a basic, fundamental decency that is not conditional on whether he agrees with them. The show's argument, I think, is that both of these things are true simultaneously, and that people like Hank are worth understanding rather than caricaturing. This was fairly unusual in 1997 and has become somewhat more valued since. His childhood with Cotton is the source of everything that doesn't work in Hank. Cotton Hill, his father, whom we'll get to properly in the next section, is a difficult, emotionally withholding, occasionally cruel man who spent Hank's whole childhood communicating the message that Hank was not quite what he'd hoped for. Cotton wanted a warrior son. He got a propane salesman. He never fully reconciled himself to this, and Hank spent years trying to earn a validation that Cotton was constitutionally unable to give him. The result is a man with a genuine capacity for love who has great difficulty expressing it. Hank is most comfortable communicating care in practical forms, doing the task, fixing the thing, showing up, because that's the language he was raised in. Emotional directness feels dangerous to him, probably because it was never modeled as safe. When his son Bobby shows emotional openness and unconventional sensitivity, Hank's instinct is often to worry rather than to celebrate, partly because he grew up with Cotton's harsh, punishing model of masculinity. This is, if you think about it, a genuinely sad portrait of how emotional damage transmits across generations. And the show holds it all lightly, keeps it comedic, and then occasionally lets it land with real weight. His medical condition is worth noting because the show treats it with unusual consistency. Hank has a narrow urethra, a condition that caused functional problems like being rejected from the army. Bobby's conception was medically difficult as a result. This detail is played for occasional comedy, but is also woven into Hank's characterization in an odd, humanizing way. It's a private vulnerability that he carries around, rarely mentioned, but always present in the background. His truck, a mid-1980s Ford Ranger, is another form of self-expression. Hank's relationship with his truck is the relationship some people have with their most valued possession, the thing that feels most like an extension of themselves. He maintains it. He is uncomfortable when anything is wrong with it. There are episodes where the truck's condition functions as a barometer for Hank's emotional state in the same way that his lawn does. Ladybird is his dog. A purebred Georgia bloodhound, there's a detail early on that her mother tracked down James Earl Ray, which is a remarkable thing for a bloodhound to have in her lineage. Hank's love for Ladybird is straightforward and warm in a way that his love for other things sometimes isn't. With Ladybird, he doesn't have to navigate emotional complexity or gender expectations or the gap between who he hoped someone would be and who they actually are. She is a very good dog, and he loves her very much. This is clear and uncomplicated. His relationship with Bobby is the show's central emotional project. Bobby is not the son Hank expected or initially the son he wanted. Bobby likes comedy and cooking shows and prop comedy and hunting in a way that doesn't look anything like hunting. He is soft, where Hank values hardness, expressive, where Hank values restraint, interested in things that Hank does not think of as masculine interests. "That boy ain't right," is how Hank describes his son to his friends in the alley in a tone that sounds like frustration and is actually, the show eventually reveals, a form of bewildered love. He doesn't know what to do with Bobby, but he also never stops trying to connect with him, never gives up on finding the shared language they don't yet have, never treats his son with cruelty even when he's disappointed or confused. The Bobby storyline is, if you follow it across the whole run, one of television's quieter studies in the slow, imperfect expansion of a parent's idea of what their child is allowed to be. Hank doesn't fully arrive anywhere. He doesn't have a neat moment of acceptance where everything crystallizes. He just keeps trying, keeps loving, keeps showing up, and gets fractionally less rigid across 15 years of television. That's a more honest trajectory than most shows would attempt. Something about Hank that I think deserves emphasis. He is often right. Not always, and not in the ways he thinks he is, but more often than the show's surface-level framing as conservative dad confused by modernity would suggest. His instinct that things should be done properly, and that integrity matters, and that relationships require maintenance, and that people should take responsibility for their actions, these are not bad instincts. They're just sometimes applied too rigidly to situations that don't fit them. The internet discovered this about Hank Hill some years after the show ended. There's a whole discourse online about Hank being right that circulates, identifying specific episodes where Hank's position turned out to be correct or where his values produced good outcomes. I don't think this discourse is entirely wrong, but I also don't think it's entirely right. Hank is right about more things than he gets credit for, and also wrong about some important things, and the show is sophisticated enough to hold both of those simultaneously without resolving them neatly. He is a good man, complicated by his upbringing, doing his best within the limits of who he is. That's the character, and honestly, for a cartoon about propane, that's quite a lot to work with. There are some specific Hank moments across the series that I keep coming back to, and I want to mention a few of them here because they illustrate different facets of the character. There's a recurring pattern in the show where Hank tries to teach Bobby something, hunting or football, or some skill that feels to Hank like an important masculine inheritance, and the attempt goes sideways in ways that reveal more about Hank than about Bobby. In one early episode, Hank can't shoot a gun properly, not well enough to enter a father-son shooting competition. He's too ashamed to admit this to Bobby, so he refuses to enter. And Bobby doesn't understand why, and there's this gap between them created entirely by Hank's inability to be honest about a limitation. The show is full of these moments. They're not played as Hank being uniquely broken, they're played as Hank being a particular kind of man of a particular generation in a particular culture where admitting weakness is very hard. The episodes where Hank and Bobby actually do connect are some of the most quietly satisfying things in the show. There's something about beef judging competitions that comes up in the later series, and the image of Hank watching Bobby demonstrate genuine expertise, and then the particular expression on Hank's face, not quite pride, more like recognition, like he's seeing his son as a whole person for the first time, is one that the show earns through years of small failures leading up to it. You can't have that moment in season 2. You can only have it in season 12, after everything that came before. His friendship with the Alley guys deserves a mention here too, in the context of who Hank is, because those relationships reveal a different version of him. With Dale and Bill and Boomhauer Air, Hank is slightly more relaxed, not emotionally open, that's not the register, but less guarded. He laughs more. He's occasionally slightly exasperated, but fundamentally pleased to be standing in that alley with those specific people. His loyalty to all three of them, even when they are being unreasonable or ridiculous, is absolute. He will bail Dale out of some conspiracy-related situation. He will try to help Bill through another depressive episode without actually calling it that. He will interpret Boomhauer's rapid mumble with complete confidence and no condescension. These friendships are, in a way, the least complicated parts of Hank's life. They don't require him to adjust. They don't ask him to be different. They just ask him to show up and drink a beer and be himself, which is what he does. His relationship with Buck Strickland, his boss, is another layer worth noting. Buck is not a good man, and Hank knows this. Buck has multiple times done genuinely terrible things, including once being willing to frame Hank for a crime. And yet Hank's loyalty to him persists, because Hank views Buck the way he views a lot of older men in his life, as a flawed authority figure who nonetheless occupies a role that Hank believes deserves a certain respect. Buck calls Hank his golden goose. because he genuinely knows that Hank is the reason strict land propane functions. This mutual dependence, wrapped in a very unequal power dynamic, is something the show understands and depicts without resolving. There's a reading of Hank Hill in which he is essentially a portrait of the ways that traditional masculine norms fail the men who embody them most thoroughly. He can't ask for help. He can't admit vulnerability. He can't say to his son that he loves him with the directness that his son probably needs. He spends enormous amounts of energy maintaining an image of competence and stability that is exhausting to maintain and that closes off possibilities for genuine intimacy. And then there's another reading in which he's a portrait of the genuine virtues that can exist within that framework. The reliability, the integrity, the loyalty, the refusal to do things badly even when no one is watching. Both readings are true. The show holds them in careful tension, and Hank Hill is the character standing in the middle of that tension, trying to do right by everyone around him within the limits of what he knows how to do. There's a version of Hank Hill that a lot of internet discourse has recently landed on, which is roughly, this is a man whose traditional values, when you look at them closely, are actually quite principled. He believes in quality. He believes in honest work done well. He believes in treating people with basic decency regardless of personal feeling. He believes in showing up. These are not bad beliefs. And many of the episodes where Hank is wrong are actually episodes where he's applying correct instincts to situations they don't fit, like using a good hammer on a screw. I think this reading is partially right and slightly too kind. Hank's values are real and in many respects admirable, but his application of them to Bobby across the show's run does produce real harm, not dramatic harm, not abuse, but the steady, accumulating cost of a child knowing that his father doesn't quite recognize him. Bobby absorbs this with extraordinary grace. That doesn't mean the cost isn't real. What the show does beautifully is refuse to resolve this into a lesson. Hank doesn't arrive at a moment of understanding after which everything is different. He shifts incrementally over years in ways that are almost invisible episode to episode and clearly visible across the whole run. This is how real change happens in real people, and King of the Hill depicts it with unusual honesty. There is no speech, there is no apology. There is just the slow adjustment of a man who loves his son and is learning, one specific moment at a time, how to show it in ways his son can receive. The moment in the revival where Bobby is an adult chef and Hank comes to eat at his restaurant, which we know is coming because of what the series set up, is, by all accounts, handled with exactly the right amount of restraint. I won't describe it in detail because I suspect it lands harder if you don't know what to expect. But it's the show delivering on a promise it made in episode 1, quietly, without announcement, in exactly the register you'd expect. He's the heart of the show. Which is appropriate because the show is largely about whether it's possible to have a genuinely good heart and also be, in some ways, genuinely limited. And the answer the show arrives at after years of showing you these people seems to be yes. You can be both of those things, and the people around you, if they love you, will meet you where you are. Picture this. You're 12 years old, it's your birthday party. A Cadillac pulls into the driveway trailing a horse trailer. The ramp of the trailer kicks open from the inside. A short, waddling old man in a cowboy hat rides a rented horse into your backyard. His feet, visible below the cuffs of his trousers, are unnervingly close to his knees. The connecting section that should be there, the shin, is simply absent. This is how Cotton Hill enters the show in his first physical appearance, the episode Shins of the Father. And it sets up everything you need to know about him. He is completely, unself-consciously, operatically himself. He has no interest in being what the situation calls for. He arrives on a rented horse because he wants to, not because Bobby needs him to arrive on a horse. He gives Bobby a shotgun, a Winchester 20 gauge, for his birthday. When Peggy snatches it, he just blows apart the piñata with it instead. He is the most difficult possible version of a grandparent, and also somehow the most present one, the one who takes up the most space, the one whose arrival changes the gravity of every room. Cotton Lyndall Hill, voiced by Toby Huss, who also voices Can in the original series, and who took over as the voice of Dale Gribb Bull for the revival after Johnny Hardwick's passing. His birth year within the show's canon places him at around 84 when he dies in season 12, born in the early 1920s, which would have made him a teenager at the outbreak of World War II. He claims he lied about his age at 14 to enlist. The show treats this as consistent with his character rather than implausible. Cotton is not a man who has ever let convention or rules govern his actions. He fought in both the European and Pacific theaters, a detail that occasionally contradicts itself in his own retellings, because Cotton is a man whose war stories have accumulated embellishments over decades of telling. The Shin story, though, the Shin story is consistent. Every time, it's almost the same. I was 14, but I knew Uncle Sam needed me, so I lied and signed up. We had beat the Nazis in Italy, and they shipped us to the Pacific Theater. A Tojo torpedo sent our troop ship to the bottom. I could only save 3 of my buddies, Fatty, Stinky, and Brooklyn. They were kind of like you fellas, only one of them was from Brooklyn. Out of the sun came a Tojo Zero and put 50 bullets in my back. The blood attracted sharks. I had to give 'em Fatty. Then things took a turn for the worse. I made it to an island, but it was full of Tojos. They were spitting on the US flag. So I rushed them, but it was a trap. They opened fire and blew my shins off. Last thing I remember, I beat them all to death with a big piece of Fatty. I woke up in a field hospital, and they were sewing my feet to my knees. I had to put that in full because it's one of the great comedy monologues in animated television. The escalation is perfect, each sentence outdoes the previous one, and it ends not with triumph but with a medical procedure that required effectively shortening him by about a foot. According to Hank, Cotton was 6'4" before the war. He came back 5'0". You can see it in the animation, the way his feet connect essentially directly to his knees, the particular waddle that results, the way he tilts slightly when he moves. The show takes the physical reality of his injury seriously while also extracting considerable comedy from it. He is very short and very loud and absolutely convinced that his stature is irrelevant to his authority. He claims to have killed 50 men in the Pacific, 50 men in his phrasing. Whether this is strictly true is left open. The show confirms that he genuinely fought in some of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific Theater. His uniform, when visible, includes the Medal of Honor and the Purple Heart, which are not decorations you can invent. He survived genuine horrors. The exaggeration, where it exists, is the exaggeration of a man who survived something real and has spent 50 years processing it into a story that his body can live inside. He has a habit of calling Hank's wife, always, never Peggy, not once across 13 seasons. In a rare moment of almost warmth, he once calls her Hillary. Hank's wife is the running designation, offered sometimes in affection and sometimes in contempt, and usually in a tone that suggests her name is simply not worth filing. Cotton's relationship with Hank is the gravitational center of a lot of the show's more serious emotional work. Cotton wanted a warrior son, a son who would carry on the tradition of hard men doing hard things. What he got was Hank, who is earnest and caring and reliable, and who sells propane. Cotton spent Hank's childhood communicating in various explicit and implicit ways that this was a disappointment. He is dismissive of Hank's opinions, contemptuous of Hank's emotions, and frequently cruel to Hank in small ways that accumulate across decades into a significant wound. And yet, Cotton loves Hank. This is also clear, even if Cotton cannot say it and perhaps genuinely does not know how to feel it in a straightforward way. There are moments where it surfaces, usually oblique, usually brief, usually followed by Cotton doing something to undercut it, but it's there. The love is real. It has just been distorted beyond easy recognition by everything Cotton went through before Hank was born. Hank spends the whole show seeking a validation from Cotton that Cotton is essentially constitutionally incapable of giving. This is not a twist or a dramatic revelation, it's just a quiet, ongoing condition of Hank's life. He knows his father's difficult. He knows his father will never quite give him what he needs. He keeps trying anyway because he is Hank Hill, and that is what Hank Hill does. Cotton's family situation is genuinely complicated. He married Hank's mother, Tilly, who eventually divorced him. The marriage, from what the show depicts of it, was not a kind one. After the divorce, Cotton married Dee Dee, a much younger woman who had been a candy striper and apparently an exotic dancer. Dee Dee is essentially Hank's age. Cotton treats this as completely unremarkable. Dee Dee and Cotton have a son together late in Cotton's life. Cotton names their son Good Hank, abbreviated GH. This is transparently an insult to regular Hank. The name exists to communicate that this new one born to Cotton's younger wife, will be the proper son. The Hank that Cotton wanted. Hank is visibly stung by this and deals with it, as he deals with most things from Cotton, by maintaining his composure and not saying what he feels. There's also Junichiro, Cotton's son, Hank's half-brother. During the war, before Cotton was shipped out of Japan, he had a relationship with a Japanese nurse named Michiko. A child resulted, Junichiro. Cotton was apparently dragged onto the troop ship leaving Japan, according to a flashback, and knew nothing of his son until much later. When Hank eventually meets Junichiro, the resemblance is striking. Same face, more or less. Same "bi-wa" response when startled. Same narrow urethra, which the show mentions with characteristic commitment to its own internal logic. Same job title, assistant manager. Junichiro is, in several respects, more like Hank than the two of them probably expected. Cotton's relationship with Bobby, the grandson, is one of the show's more genuinely surprising dynamics. Cotton is warmer with Bobby than with almost anyone else in the family. He takes Bobby to bars and tells him things. He teaches him things that Peggy would object to if she knew. When Bobby accidentally burns down a church, Cotton covers for him, takes the blame, because, as he explains in his own way, he didn't want the incident to follow Cotton through his whole life. The old man who has never had any trouble doing whatever he wants to do, extending a form of protection to the kid whose life is all ahead of him. It's a moment that complicates Cotton without redeeming him, which is exactly right. He contains contradictions. He is capable of genuine warmth and also of genuine cruelty, and the show doesn't resolve this into a neat either-or. He also shows a peculiar skill when he correctly identifies Kan Su Pu Nu Sin phone as Laotian, in an early episode where everyone else in AR Len assumes Kan is Chinese or Japanese. Cotton explains, unself-consciously, that during the war, American soldiers were taught to distinguish between different Asian nationalities. The detail is darkly funny and also probably accurate, and the result is that Cotton and Kan, the two most cantankerous men in the neighborhood, form an odd, mutual respect that runs beneath the surface of several episodes. They share a voice actor, incidentally, Toby Huss voices both, which gives their scenes a particular resonance if you know to listen for it. Cotton's death comes in the 12th season in an episode called Death Picks Cotton. He is severely burned in a freak shrimp accident at a Japanese restaurant, his own body betraying him in the proximity of his oldest enemy, and ends up in the hospital. The show plays it as one of those situations where Cotton seems like he might actually survive, and then complications arise. His old war injuries, his age, his body finally arriving at its limits. On his deathbed, Cotton has a strange final conversation with Hank. He tries one last time to communicate something. The shape of what he means is love, though the words don't quite form that way. Hank says he loves him. Cotton berates him for it, because Cotton cannot let that stand, cannot let the moment be straightforward, cannot resist making Hank feel small even at the very end. And then Peggy, whose patience with Cotton has been tested for years, finally says what she actually thinks of him. She tells him, in the manner of someone who has held something in for a very long time, that she hopes he lives forever. The joke is that she means this as a curse. Eternal life for this man sounds exhausting for everyone involved. Cotton's response is, "Do ya now?" He closes his eyes. The heart rate monitor goes flat. He dies out of spite, the show implies. He cannot resist it. Even death he turns into a power move. It is exactly perfect. And it is somehow the right ending for the character, because it's funny and also because there's a real grief in it. The grief of a relationship that never quite resolved. A father and son who loved each other without ever managing to say so in a way the other could receive. Cotton Hill died on November 11, 2007, according to the show's internal timeline. Veterans Day. The show couldn't resist that. There's a detail I want to come back to, which is the way that Cotton exists in relation to the other older men of A.R. Len. The VFW post is his domain, Veterans of Foreign Wars. He goes there to sit with other men who survive things and who now spend their evenings relitigating those survivals. His wartime buddies, Topsy, Stinky, Brooklyn, appear occasionally in the show. Topsy eventually dies off screen. Cotton handles this the way he handles most things, with the gruff, defiant energy of a man who refuses to acknowledge that time is running out. He is, in his way, a portrait of a very specific kind of American masculinity that was forged under extreme conditions and never quite adjusted to peace. The military hierarchy gave him structure. The war gave him identity. Coming home gave him a family he didn't know how to love, and a country that was changing around him in ways he didn't understand, and nothing to replace the clarity and purpose of being a soldier with. The result is a man who is still, decades later, fighting. He just doesn't always know what he's fighting. I don't think the show asks you to forgive Cotton. It doesn't need you to. It just asks you to understand what shaped him, which is a different thing. Understanding why someone is the way they are doesn't excuse the harm they cause. But it does make them three-dimensional. And three-dimensional characters, even difficult ones, are more interesting than flat ones. Cotton Hill is a great character in the old-fashioned sense of that phrase. Great as in large. Great as in taking up more space than he should, being impossible to ignore, leaving an impression that outlasts his actual screen time. The episodes without him are often good. The episodes with him are often something else, a different register, a different energy, a different set of stakes. His absence from the later seasons, and then his death in season 12, changes the emotional texture of the show. Hank spends the final seasons in a world where his father is no longer a variable he has to account for. It's a subtle change, but a real one. The shadow Cotton cast over Hank's life doesn't disappear when Cotton does, but the source of it is gone, and Hank has to work out who he is without it pressing down on him. There is one more Cotton detail I want to name, which is how the show handles his death in relation to the audience's complicated feelings about him. By the time Cotton dies in season 12, the show has spent more than a decade making him funny and infuriating and occasionally unexpectedly tender. The audience's relationship to him is not simple. You don't purely like him. You don't purely dislike him. You have the relationship with him that Hank has, the relationship of someone who has been hurt by a person and also loves them and also cannot entirely write them off because the love is real even when the behavior is not acceptable. The death scene asks you to hold all of that simultaneously, and it does this by not resolving it. Cotton doesn't redeem himself. He doesn't say the thing Hank needed him to say for 60-odd years. He dies being exactly who he always was, right down to the spite. And the show trusts the audience to feel what they actually feel about that, which is complicated and sad and also slightly relieved and also funny, because Peggy's "I hope you go on living forever as you are now," being received with Cotton calling her worthless and saying this was supposed to happen to her, is objectively one of the most brutally honest moments in the series. Television is quite bad generally at depicting difficult people dying the way difficult people actually die, as themselves, unimproved, right to the end. Shows want deathbed reconciliations. They want final moments of clarity. They want the character's worst qualities to soften as the heart rate monitor descends. Cotton doesn't soften. He goes out in character at full intensity, and the grief that follows is the complicated grief of losing someone who was always hard to love and who you loved anyway. That's Cotton, feet on his knees, fitty men to his name, and a presence in the show that echoes well beyond his death scene. Nobody decided to call it a ritual. Nobody announced that they would be gathering here between the fence and the driveway on warm evenings after work with cans of beer. It just happened, and then it kept happening for 30-odd years. And somewhere along the way, it became the thing that made their lives possible. This is the alley. It is a patch of concrete between 2 rows of suburban houses behind Rainy Street. It has a wooden fence along one side. There is sometimes a lawnmower visible. There is often a rubbish bin. There is nothing about it that invites a visitor. It is functional space that was not designed to be inhabited, and these 4 men have inhabited it anyway because they had to put themselves somewhere. I think this is one of the show's most genuinely wise observations, that the most important social spaces in people's lives are often not the design ones. Not the living rooms or the restaurants or the bars, the alley, the back of a car, the porch step at 11 at night, the places that happened to be there when people needed somewhere to be. Hank has been friends with Dale, Bill, and Boom Hauer for 30 years or more by the time the show begins. The specifics of how the friendship formed are mostly left to implication. They presumably grew up together in AR Lynn, went to the same school, ended up in adjacent houses through a combination of choice and circumstance. The friendship itself is never examined or questioned within the show. It is simply a given, like weather or gravity. These 4 men are friends, that's the situation. What the show is interested in is what that friendship looks like in practice. And in practice, it looks like 4 men standing in an alley, drinking Alamo beer, talking about almost nothing that actually matters while everything that matters quietly circulates beneath the surface. Alamo beer is worth its own moment of attention here. The fictional A.R. Len Texas-based lager that Hank and his friends drink in King of the Hill is simply the beer of the alley. It is not aspirational. It is not craft. It is cold, domestic, and available. And it is what these men drink when they are being themselves. The brand has a certain weight in the show's visual language. It appears constantly enough to function almost as a character itself, the shared object that facilitates the ritual of being together. The fact that a real Alamo beer company based in San Antonio partnered with Hulu to produce actual King of the Hill branded beer for the 2025 revival is, I think, genuinely pleasing. It launched first in Texas and then across the United States. A fictional beer made real because the show became real to enough people. This is the kind of thing that happens when a piece of culture actually lands. The 4-person dynamic of the alley is worth understanding in some detail because it works the way a good ensemble should. Each person covers a different part of the spectrum. Hank is the center, the straight man and the moral anchor. When things go wrong, they go wrong in relation to Hank's worldview. He sets the tone, he defines the norm, and everyone else's comedy is partly about the distance between them and the norm Hank represents. Dale is the chaos, the element that destabilizes, the one most likely to do something idiotic that drags the others into a situation they never asked for. He is also the one whose presence most often generates the show's broader comedy. His conspiracies and his delusions and his terrible decisions are the engine for a lot of plots. Bill is the pathos. He is the reminder that underneath the comedy there is actual human sadness. His depression, his loneliness, his inability to recover from Lenore, these give the alley a gravity that it wouldn't otherwise have. When something Bill says in the alley hits a particular register, the show briefly becomes something more serious than a comedy, and it lands because Bill is always there, always slightly sad, always the same. Boomhauer is the mystery. He is the one whose life is the least examined, the least disclosed. He is the most superficially successful of the group, the most conventionally attractive, the one who doesn't seem to have the same kind of obvious wounds the others carry, and yet he remains the most opaque. There are dimensions to him that the show reveals very slowly, and in the alley, he mostly functions as a kind of genial, mumbling presence that anchors the group without requiring explanation. Cotton once looked at this group and compared them to his wartime buddies, Fatty, Stinky, and Brooklyn. They were kind of like you fellas, he told them. Only one of them was from Brooklyn. This was delivered as a mild insult because Cotton's compliments tend to come wrapped in condescension. But it contained something real. The alley group is, for these four men, the equivalent of the unit. The people you survive with, the people whose continued existence matters to you even when you're not actively thinking about why. There's a specific kind of male friendship that the alley depicts, the kind that doesn't require emotional vocabulary. These men don't tell each other what they're feeling, they don't process their feelings aloud or describe their inner lives, or support each other in the language of modern therapeutic culture. What they do is show up. They are there in the alley in the evening, and their presence is itself a form of care. The fact that Bill is there, sad, carrying his sadness, but there, means that Hank doesn't have to ask how Bill is doing to know that Bill is all right enough to be in the alley, and that matters. The show understands this kind of friendship with real precision. It never mocks it. It also never entirely uncritically endorses it. There are moments where Hank's emotional limitations are clearly connected to this culture of not saying things, where the cost of never discussing feelings becomes visible. But it treats the friendship itself as genuine and valuable on its own terms, which is not nothing. A lot of culture either romanticizes the stoic male friendship or pathologizes it. King of the Hill mostly just shows it. The alley is also a reset valve. Whatever has happened in an episode, whatever conflict or embarrassment or problem has accumulated, the show tends to return to the alley in its final moments. Not as a narrative resolution, the problem might not be solved, but as a reminder that the baseline persists. Hank and Dale and Bill and Boom Howher will be in the alley tomorrow. The lawn will need mowing. The beer will be cold. And that's enough. I find this genuinely moving in a way that I recognize is a bit out of proportion to a patch of concrete and four cartoon men. But the show earns it, I think. Years of showing you what the alley means and then cutting back to it at the end creates something, a sense of continuity, of home, of things that persist even when everything else is complicated. The alley also tells us something about class and community and what happens when the designed social institutions, the church, the club, the bar, don't quite fit. These men have access to all those things and choose the alley instead because the alley doesn't have a dress code or a cover charge or a social expectation to perform a version of themselves that they're not. They can just be Hank and Dale and Bill and Boom Howher between the houses with a can of beer. There's an episode, and I'll come back to a lot of specific episodes later in this video, where Dale wheels a small television out into the alley. They watch something on it together. This somehow makes the alley into exactly what it already was, just with television. The ritual absorbs it. Nothing is disrupted. The television is removed when it's no longer needed, and the alley is still the alley. That's the alley, the most important bit of concrete in the history of Fox animation. The alley also produces some of the show's most consistently reliable comedy, which is worth acknowledging. The format of the alley scene, four men gathered in a loose line, chatting casually, often without making much eye contact, is a constraint that turns out to be generative. You can't have the kind of conversation in this setting that you'd have sitting across a table from someone. You can have the kind of conversation you have when you're both doing something else or just standing somewhere, with your hands occupied and your eyes not quite meeting. The emotional register of those conversations is different, more oblique, more digressive, more likely to veer away from what's actually being said into something adjacent. Hank processes most of his genuine feelings through alley conversations. Not by stating them, he rarely states them, but by mentioning things in passing, by the particular way he says, "I tell you what," in certain tones, by what he doesn't say when the subject comes up. If you watch the alley scenes closely, you get more information about what Hank is actually feeling than from almost any other source in the show. His friends receive this information, understand it, and respond to it, also without naming it. It's a whole parallel language of not quite saying. There's a specific quality to the alley that makes it feel safe, I think, which is that it's outside. It's not inside anyone's house, which would create obligation and domestic context. It's not in public, which would create performance. It's in between, semi-private, semi-outdoors, governed by rules that everyone has learned without anyone stating them. You can leave whenever you want. You can say very little, and it's fine. You can stand there in relative silence, and it doesn't register as awkward. The alley's grammar allows for a kind of presence that doesn't require anything. I find that actually quite beautiful. A space designed to require nothing that somehow produces everything. Now let's talk about the most interesting person who stands in it, which is, I think, Dale. The alley also marks time in a way the show never makes explicit. There's no calendar, no season creeping into the background, no explicit sense of years passing. But returning to the alley so consistently, episode after episode, gives you the impression of accumulated time. You feel the weight of all the evenings these men have spent here, even the ones you never saw. The alley feels ancient in the way that habits feel ancient, not because it is genuinely old, but because it has been repeated so many times that it seems inevitable. Hank bought his house on Rainy Street presumably decades ago. Dale and Nancy are across the street. Bill is to one side, Boomhauer is nearby. They all ended up here, within shouting distance of each other, and the result is this patch of concrete that became the center of their social lives. There's something about proximity and time that produces a kind of love that doesn't need to announce itself. You don't choose your alley neighbors the way you might choose friends you met at university or at work, but you end up knowing them anyway, and knowing people across decades produces a different kind of knowing, less articulate, more total. The show gets this. It's in the scenes where Hank and Bill have a moment of genuine honesty and then don't quite know what to do with it, so they move on to something practical. It's in the scenes where Dale does something genuinely stupid and Hank's frustration is clearly inseparable from his fondness. It's in the scenes where Boomhauer just walks up and stands there and nobody has to explain why he's there or what he wants, because he's always been there. The alley is a long marriage. It's just that instead of one person, it's four of them. And instead of a house, it's a bit of concrete. And then there's the beer, which ties it all together, the shared object, the reason to be standing here rather than inside. Cold Alamo beer on a warm Texas evening. This is the frame around everything else, around the propane and the conspiracies and the depression and the mumbling and all of it. Just the beer and the people who drink it together. I said we'd talk about Dale next, and I meant it. Rusty Shackelford. This is the name that Dale Gribb Bull uses for most of his transactions with the world. He receives unemployment compensation as Rusty Shackelford. He uses the alias when he doesn't want his true identity known, which is most of the time. He considers Rusty Shackelford a kind of parallel existence, a name he can operate under that keeps his real self off the grid, away from the surveillance of the government and the various other forces that Dale believes are monitoring him. The irony which the show eventually deploys is that the real Rusty Shackelford exists. He eventually shows up, he is alive, and he would quite like Dale to stop using his name and social security number. This episode is one of the show's funnier meta moments. The alias Dale thought was safely theoretical, turning out to have belonged to a real person all along. Dale Alvin Gribb Bull. Voiced by Johnny Hardwick throughout the original run in the first 6 episodes of the revival before Hardwick's death in August 2023. Toby Huss, who has been in the show in various capacities since the beginning, took over as Dale's voice from episode 8 of season 14 onwards. It is worth saying, in the spirit of not pretending otherwise, that Hardwick was a significant part of what made Dale work. The voice he gave the character, that particular combination of paranoid energy and aggrieved self-righteousness and oddly earnest love, was specific to him. The transition is handled respectfully and Huss does well, but it is a transition. Dale's job is exterminator. He runs a business called Dale's Dead Bug. He is, by the evidence of the show, actually good at it. Pest control is a real skill, and Dale applies himself to it with the same intensity he applies to everything, which is considerable. He is a skinny, perpetually squinting man in a baseball cap who keeps cigarettes on his person at almost all times, and whose health has been a minor running concern. An early episode establishes that his doctor told him he could die before he's 50, though he has not, as of the revival, died. His conspiracy theories are the most visible part of his personality, and I want to think about what function they actually serve for him because I don't think they're merely comic material. Dale lives in a world that doesn't make sense to him. The government is enormous and powerful and opaque. Corporations do inexplicable things. History is full of things that were done in secret and only revealed later. His wife, we'll get to this, it's a significant subject, is doing something he cannot quite acknowledge. His son doesn't quite look the way he'd expect. In this context, the conspiracy theories are actually a coping mechanism. If you believe that everything is part of an elaborate, coordinated scheme, then nothing is random and nothing is your fault. The bad things that happen to you are the result of forces working against you. The confusions of the world are not evidence of the world's inherent messiness, but of a hidden order that you, uniquely, are able to perceive. Dale's conspiracies are, at heart, a way of making the world feel meaningful and controllable, even when it isn't. This is not an unusual psychological dynamic. It is, in fact, extremely common. King of the Hill is one of the funnier depictions of it because Dale takes it to extreme heights. He suspects alien involvement in most government activities. He has an elaborate system of food storage in his backyard bunker. He monitors communications with equipment he's built himself, but the underlying mechanism is recognizable. He uses the alias Rusty Shackelford not because he has done anything that requires this level of evasion, but because he has convinced himself that simply existing under his real name is a form of vulnerability. The government knows he is Dale Grib Bull. Better to conduct business as someone else. The fact that this doesn't actually protect him from anything doesn't matter. The act of obfuscation makes him feel more in control. His collection of guns is extensive. He is the president of the A.R. Len Gun Club. He is a licensed bounty hunter, a credential he occasionally deploys in episodes with limited practical effect. He considers himself knowledgeable about military matters, though his actual physical capability in a fight is approximately 0. He is, by the show's estimation, the weakest of the alley guys, and despite his posturing around firearms, his aim is quite poor. He is also an avid ufologist, deeply interested in extraterrestrial activity and its relationship to governmental cover-ups. This is connected to one of the more poignant running jokes in the show. Dale once, while going through a period of suspicion about Joseph's paternity, theorized that Joseph might have been fathered by an alien. He arrived at this conclusion because the alternative, that Joseph is the biological son of John Redcorn, the man who was having a 15-year affair with Dale's wife, was simply not available to him. Nancy Hicks Grib Bull, whom we'll discuss properly in a later section, had an affair with John Redcorn for 14 years. The affair produced Joseph. John Redcorn is Native American. Joseph has Redcorn's skin tone, his dark hair, his jaw, his height, his athletic ability. The resemblance is not subtle. Everyone in the neighborhood knows. Hank, Peggy, Boomhauer, Bill. At some point, basically all of A.R. Len. The running joke of the show's early seasons is that Dale, the man who suspects everyone of everything, is the only person who doesn't know the one actual secret that directly affects his life. His theory about an alien father for Joseph is one of the show's great comic payoffs on this theme. He has elaborate reasons why alien paternity explains Joseph's appearance and abilities. He presents this as a conspiracy, a remarkable thing, a privilege even. His son has alien blood in him. This is much more manageable than the truth. The fan theory that Dale actually knows, that he has always known, is one of the more interesting running discussions in King of the Hill fan communities, and I find it genuinely compelling. There are specific moments in the show that are hard to explain unless Dale has some awareness. He once walked in on John Redcorn climbing through his bedroom window and registered no particular reaction. Redcorn himself once said that Dale's obliviousness really takes the fun out of it. Dale monitors all incoming calls, which he has said explicitly, which means he has almost certainly heard conversations between Nancy and John Redcorn. The alternative reading is that Dale loves Nancy and Joseph so completely and so unconditionally that his brain has decided not to process information that would require him to reconfigure the world he wants to live in. His watching Bill go through the divorce from Lenore, watching what the dissolution of that marriage did to Bill, the weight loss, and then the weight gain, the depression, the loss of identity, may have impressed on him at some level below articulation that he cannot afford to know. The knowing would destroy everything. The not knowing keeps his family intact. Both of these readings are available simultaneously, and the show is wise enough not to resolve them. Dale's relationship with Joseph, regardless of what he knows or doesn't know, is one of the warmer relationships in the show. He is proud of Joseph in ways that are entirely genuine, even when the things he's proud of are attributes that he himself doesn't possess, and that Joseph clearly didn't inherit from Dale's side. He coaches Joseph, he defends Joseph, he involves Joseph in his various schemes and paranoid enterprises. Joseph grows up increasingly weird, taking on Dale's particular energy more than Redcorn's or Nancy's, which is one of the show's best long-running observations about how people become who they are. And Dale sees this as validation. John Redcorn, the biological father, has to watch from the outside. He tries occasionally to create moments with Joseph. Joseph finds him creepy. Joseph doesn't know why Redcorn keeps trying to be around him. Joseph is essentially being raised by the wrong father, except the wrong father turns out to love him more specifically and more consistently than the right one ever quite managed to, from his position of distance. This is the show's most genuinely complicated ongoing situation, and it's played almost entirely for comedy, and it works. In season 14, it emerged that Dale was briefly the mayor of A.R. Len. He ran against a large field of candidates and won with only 9% of the vote, a victory made possible by the split field. He resigned 36 hours after his election because, in his words, he had no faith in a system that would elect him. There is something here that approaches self-awareness, Dale understanding at some level that if the system let him win, the system has a problem, but it's Dale, so it's also entirely possible that he's treating his resignation as a political statement rather than an act of humility. Dale Gribbull is a man I would find exhausting to know in real life. He's also one of the most interesting characters in an animated comedy of his era. He contains contradictions that the show never resolves: the paranoia and the love, the selfishness and the loyalty. The man who sees conspiracies everywhere and misses the one right in front of him. He is ridiculous and also, in his way, rather real. Rusty Shackelford. That's who he is when the world gets too close. And the world is always getting too close. There are a few more Dale details I want to mention before we move on, because they're the kind of things that make him a richer character than the surface allows. His relationship with Hank is worth examining on its own terms. Dale is the alley's chaos agent, the one whose plans go wrong, whose schemes create collateral damage, whose worldview requires the most maintenance from those around him. And Hank is, reliably, the person who deals with the consequences of Dale being Dale. This would seem like an unequal friendship, the kind where one person does all the giving and the other does all the taking. But it isn't quite that. Dale is also, in his way, loyal to Hank. When Hank needs something, not a plan, not a scheme, just someone to stand there and be on his side, Dale is there. He doesn't always know what the right thing to say is. He may not say anything at all that's relevant, but he shows up. For Dale, given how little Dale does anything for anyone other than Dale, this matters. There's an episode where Dale and Hank go on a camping trip together and something happens that brings out a real tenderness in the dynamic, not sentimentality, but the specific kind of care that two people who've known each other for 30 years can have even when one of them is extremely difficult. These moments are rare in Dale's storylines. When they occur, they're worth paying attention to. His extermination business also produces some of the show's better single-episode jokes. Dale's approach to pest control shares characteristics with his approach to conspiracy theories. It tends toward the overcomplicated, it involves equipment that no reasonable professional would use, and it occasionally creates more problems than it solves. And yet he keeps the business running. He has clients. The pests, by some combination of competence and persistence, do tend to end up dead. He is also, in early seasons, said to be an avid smoker to the degree that his health is genuinely at risk. The health concern fades as the show goes on, the way that specific details sometimes do in long-running series. But it's there in the background, a reminder that Dale, for all his paranoid vigilance, is not actually taking particularly good care of his body. The cigarette is a visual part of the character. He is almost always holding one or smoking one. It fits the general aesthetic of a man who has decided that the way he's going to live is his business, government surveillance notwithstanding. And then there's the hat, the baseball cap that is essentially never off his head, the sunglasses that are similarly constant. The combination creates a visual effect. You never fully see Dale's eyes in an unguarded way, never see his whole face clearly. Always there is some form of cover. This is perfect characterization through costume design. Dale is a man who keeps himself obscured, and his appearance reflects it. There's one dimension of Dale that I haven't given enough space to, which is his relationship with Nancy considered on its own terms, not the affair, which we've covered, but the actual marriage underneath the affair. Dale loves Nancy. This is completely clear and never in question. He loves her with the specific, uncomplicated, unself-conscious devotion of a man who found the person he wanted and stopped looking. He has never hedged this. He has never played it cool. When he talks about Nancy, there is no irony in it. She is the person he chose, and he's at peace with having chosen her. His conspiracy paranoia extends to everything except her. Whatever surveillance he imagines the government conducting on his life, Nancy is outside it. She is the one thing he trusts without qualification. This makes the affair even stranger to think about, and the fan theory that he knows even more strange. If Dale knows, if he has been aware at some level that Nancy and Redcorn have been together, and has simply chosen to absorb this rather than lose his family, then what we're seeing in his devotion to Nancy is not naivety, but decision. A decision that his marriage and his son are worth more to him than his pride, and that the only way to protect them is to never make the knowledge official. I find this reading genuinely moving, which is not something I expected to say about a show that includes a running joke about a man not knowing his wife is having an affair. The potential dignity in Dale's position, if the theory is right, is real. He is a man who might be choosing to absorb a humiliation rather than destroy the people he loves. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. His relationship with Hank, independent of the affair, is the show's most stable friendship. Bill is the one Hank worries about. Boomhauer is the one Hank doesn't quite need to worry about. Dale is the one Hank finds exasperating and somehow cannot do without. The exasperation is genuine. So is the cannot do without. Dale creates problems. He also shows up. The two facts coexist as they tend to in real friendships. Rusty Shackelford, the best alias for the most paranoid man in suburban Texas. Now, Bill. before we get to Bill D.O.H. Trave as he exists now, which is overweight and bald and clinically depressed and living across the street from the hills with an aggressive absence of good news in his life, we should spend a moment with Bill D.O.H. Treve as he was, the Billdozer. In his high school years at A.R. Len High, Bill was a star fullback. A good-looking young man with long, flowing, frizzy brown hair and the kind of athletic build that made sport look effortless, with a nickname whose exact origin was never clearly documented. The Billdozer. He set school records. People cheered for him. He was, by the available evidence, the kind of boy around whom a certain type of American high school story is built. This is the before picture. The show occasionally returns to it in flashbacks, and the contrast with the after picture with what you can see every day in the alley is not subtle. But the point of the contrast isn't cruelty. It's to show you that this is a real person with a real past, not a character who is always going to be the sad one. Bill D.O.H. Trave had a whole life ahead of him. He had promise. He had what looked, from the outside, like a trajectory. And then Lenore, William Fontaine de la Tour, D.O.H. Treve. That's his full name. The French middle name is not incidental. Bill has Cajun heritage, grew up in Louisiana with his cousin Gilbert, speaks Cajun French as well as English, comes from a southern Louisiana French-American family with its own customs and its own weight. This background comes up occasionally in the show, in episodes that take him back to Louisiana to visit the extended D.O.H. Treve world. These episodes are some of the show's more interesting left turns because they place Bill in a context where he is not simply the sad, divorced neighbor, but a person with a history and a culture that predate A.R. Len. He is a sergeant and barber in the United States Army. This is his actual job, the one that presumably provides him with income and benefits and some framework of purpose. He cuts hair at a military base. He is, by the evidence of the show, good at cutting hair, which is not something that often gets discussed because the show's comedy around Bill mostly concerns his personal life rather than his professional competence. Lenore is his ex-wife. She left him years before the show begins, and much of Bill's emotional life across the original run can be understood as the long, slow, unfinished process of recovering from this fact. He loved her, she abused him, she cheated on him, she left. He cut his hair off with a weed whacker after she went, which is both a darkly comic image and an image of a particular kind of grief. The kind where you do something to your body to externalize what you're feeling inside. The depression that followed the divorce is, by the time we meet him, part of the furniture of who he is. It is a running element of his character rather than a storyline that resolves. Bill is depressed. He will be depressed tomorrow. He was depressed yesterday. There are episodes where this comes into sharper focus, where something happens that makes his depression more acute or provides a moment of relative relief. But it never goes away entirely because it is a condition of his life rather than a temporary weather pattern. The show handles this with an unusual kind of care. Bill's depression is funny and it is also real. The comedy doesn't undercut the realness. There are moments in Bill's storylines where the show steps briefly out of its comedy register and just shows you what this man is actually carrying, and those moments have weight because the comedy has made you care about him first. He is genuinely kind. This is perhaps the most important thing about Bill, and I think it's what makes him more interesting than the premise of depressed, divorced man would suggest. The thing underneath the sadness and the neediness and the gullibility is a good heart. He wants good things for people. He is inclined toward generosity even when his own life is not providing him much. He will help his neighbors. He will try to do the right thing. He will be manipulated into bad situations partly because he can't quite believe that people who seem to need him actually mean him harm. His loneliness makes him gullible in the show's diagnosis. He is so desperate for human connection and attention that he becomes an easy target for anyone who appears to be offering those things. This isn't a character flaw in the moralistic sense. It's a consequence of being very hurt for a very long time. The loneliness is real, and the desperation to relieve it is understandable. and the comedy that results from it is at Bill's expense in a way the show is generally thoughtful about. He has a foot fetish. The show mentions this periodically, and Peggy's oversized feet are a source of his particular attention to her. This is deployed as comedy, but also as one more detail that makes Bill specific. He is not a generic, depressed man, but a specific person with a specific inner life that is, to be honest, rather unusual. He idolizes Hank. There is something genuinely moving about the way Bill looks at Hank, a man with a stable marriage, a functional career, a house in order, a son, a dog, and sees everything he used to have, or thought he was going to have before things went wrong. Hank's life is not perfect, but from Bill's vantage point, it looks like the life he was supposed to be living. His attachment to Hank's household is excessive in ways Hank finds both touching and uncomfortable. He also pines for Peggy in a low-level, undemanding way that she alternately finds irritating and occasionally flattering. The show is careful about this. It's not predatory or threatening. It's just Bill being drawn toward warmth wherever he can find it. Peggy sometimes exploits this for small purposes and sometimes simply recognizes that Bill's feeling for her is genuine even if misplaced. His romantic history, despite everything, contains actual successes. Former Texas Governor Ann Richards appeared as a guest character and dated Bill for a period. This is one of the show's better cameos. And the fact that the real Ann Richards was willing to appear in this context is charming. He also had relationships with Con's mother and Luann's mother at various points, and with the young widows of two of his dead cousins, and with various other women across the series who saw something in him worth pursuing, even if the pursuits didn't last. Bill is, despite everything, a person who is capable of being loved. The problem is not that no one could love him. The problem is that the person he loved and the loss of her have made it impossible for him to fully receive what anyone else might offer. He is stuck in a before picture of himself, waiting for something that has already ended to unend. His Louisiana heritage produces some of the show's more distinctive storytelling when it surfaces. The DOH Treve family episodes are unusual in the Koth landscape. They introduce extended family dynamics, cultural specificity, and a version of Bill that is embedded in a community and a history that A.R. Lynn doesn't know about. His cousin Gilbert is a recurring presence in these episodes, a much more flamboyant figure who stands in contrast to everything about A.R. Lynn's social norms, and who seems paradoxically more at peace with himself than Bill has ever been. There's a version of Bill where he goes back to Louisiana, reintegrates into the DOH Treve world, finds something to build a new life around. The show doesn't go there because Bill is a sad one in A.R. Lynn and the show needs him to stay. But you can feel the alternative sometimes, the road not taken, the life that might have been easier for him. In season 14 of the revival, the information offered about Bill is that he has been living as a shut-in since COVID. This feels somehow like the least surprising update anyone could have received about any character. Of course, Bill has been living as a shut-in since COVID. Bill's entire personality was preparing him for this eventuality. The question the revival might eventually address is whether he comes back out. The Billdozer, the man who used to push people out of the way by sheer force of movement, and is now barely able to push himself through a Tuesday. King of the Hill is at its best when it holds both of these things, the before and the after, at once, letting you feel the distance between them without asking you to do anything about it. There's a real love in the alley for Bill. Not a love that's talked about, not a love that's performed, just the love of showing up, of continuing to stand next to someone even when you can see that they're not okay. That's what Hank and Dale and Boomhauer give Bill, week after week, episode after episode. They stand next to him. It is, for Bill, enough. And it is, the show suggests, more than many people ever get. There's something I want to come back to about Bill's relationship with Lenore, which is what the show is doing with it beyond the obvious comedy. Lenore is a powerful absence. She appears once in the original series as a contemporary person. She is depicted almost entirely as a memory, a photograph, and the focus of Bill's ongoing grief, only appearing in person once. And yet she shapes everything about him. She is the before-after line. Everything Bill was before Lenore left is on one side, and everything he became after is on the other. And the show lives entirely in the after, with the before visible only in retrospect. What's interesting about this is that the show does not romanticize Lenore or pretend she was good for Bill. By the accounts the show provides, she abused him, she cheated on him, she was cruel to him, and the marriage was not a happy one. Bill's longing for her is not really longing for her in particular, it's longing for who he was when he still believed in the future he thought they were building together. The grief is not about Lenore, it's about the Bill who used to exist. This is a more sophisticated psychological observation than you usually get from a network animated comedy in the early 2000s. The show notes it without making it explicit, lets it sit in the background of Bill's characterization, available to anyone who's willing to think about it a bit. There is also the question of what would actually happen if Bill recovered. If he met someone, genuinely connected with them, stopped being the sad, divorced man, and became a different version of himself. The show occasionally gestures toward this possibility and then pulls back from it, because Bill recovering is not the role he plays in the alley dynamics. The alley needs him in a particular configuration. This is not a conscious decision on anyone's part, it's just that recovery is hard. And the habits of unhappiness are strong, and A.R. Lin is not a place that offers a lot of external pressure toward change. But the potential is always there. Bill was someone before. He could theoretically become someone again. There are specific Bill moments across the run of the show that I keep returning to. There's the one where he becomes briefly involved with a woman and is so unused to positive attention that he doesn't know what to do with it. He becomes anxious and overeager in ways that end the relationship, but there's a brief window where you see something in him that looked like it might have been okay, and the loss of that window is genuinely sad. The show knows what it's doing here. It's not cruelty, it's honesty about how damage can prevent what it most wants. There's also the recurring pattern of Bill stepping up in ways nobody expected. When things genuinely go wrong, when someone in the group is in real trouble rather than comic trouble, Bill is sometimes the one who functions. His military training and the specific competence it gave him surface occasionally in ways that reframe him. For a short time in one episode, he is the most capable person in a situation, and the show holds this without comment, and then returns him to his usual configuration. But you remember it. His Ann Richards storyline is one of the more surreal things the show does, and it works entirely because the show plays it completely straight. The former governor of Texas, a real person, played by herself for the few years before her death in 2006, dates Bill. Not as a joke, as a thing that happens in this world to this man. And Bill is genuinely sweet about it and genuinely devastated when it ends, and the episode treats his feelings with the same seriousness it would treat anyone's feelings. There is no moment of, isn't it absurd that the governor is dating this person? The show just lets it be real. That's Bill, a man with more in him than anyone around him, including himself, tends to recognize. I find that oddly hopeful in the context of a show whose comedy around this character is mostly about how unwell he is. The Billdozer is still in there. He's just been waiting for conditions that never quite arrive. Now, Boomhauer. Let's start with what he's actually saying. Most King of the Hill viewers, on first encounter with Boomhauer, adopt a strategy of just letting it wash over them, the rapid, mumbled, thick Texan-accented stream of words, the dang ol', and I tell you what, and man that surface reliably enough to parse, and then the rest of it, which arrives in a rush that the ear doesn't quite catch. You understand the general tone and intention, you miss the specifics. The show treats this as completely unremarkable. The other characters understand Boomhauer perfectly. The gap in comprehension is entirely the audience's problem. But if you listen carefully, and I mean carefully, perhaps with subtitles, perhaps multiple times, Boomhauer is sometimes saying something coherent and specific. He is not talking nonsense. He is having actual conversations with actual content. His speech is not incoherent. It is fast and heavily accented and elided in ways that are unfamiliar to most ears. And the result sounds like chaos, but it is ordered chaos. He knows what he means. He's saying what he means. The problem is calibration, not cognition. There is a season 7 episode that makes this explicit in a very satisfying way. In this episode, Boomhauer is the protagonist. The season 3 Boomhauer episode is told partly from his perspective. And when we hear the world from inside his head, everyone else is talking the way Boomhauer talks. Hank is a rapid, elided mumble. Dale is a rapid, elided mumble. Bill is a rapid, elided mumble. And Boomhauer himself speaks with perfect clarity, and we understand every word. What the episode is suggesting, and it's a genuinely clever suggestion, is that Boomhauer's speech is not disordered. It's just calibrated to a different frequency. He hears the world the way we hear him, as a rush of partially comprehensible sound that he filters and understands because he grew up with it. To him, his speech is normal. Everyone else sounds like they're talking too fast and running their words together. This reframing changes how you watch the show. Boomhauer is not a comic figure of limited speech. He is a man who communicates in a way that is specific to him, whose communication style creates a particular kind of intimacy with the people who've learned to hear it over 30 years of friendship. His full name is Jeffrey Dexter Boomhau, Earth 3. The third is important. He comes from a family. The first name takes 13 seasons to confirm on screen. A Canadian woman visiting for the summer eventually calls him Jeff, and the name sticks, and the finale confirms it when his driver's license is briefly visible. Jeffrey Dexter Boomhau III, a real name for a person who seemed for years to resist ordinary categorization. What we know about his life is partial. An early episode mentions that he was an electrical engineer, that he's currently on workers' compensation. This never quite squares with how he presents the easy lifestyle, the large house that he apparently owns, the succession of women he dates with apparent effortlessness. The electrical engineer detail is mentioned once and never returned to with any particular force. It's possible that the workers' compensation was substantial, or that Boomhauer has resources from other sources, or that this is simply one of those character details that the writers introduced early and then quietly let drift. He is the alley's ladies' man. This is consistent across the entire run of the show. Boomhauer dates. He dates a lot. He is conventionally attractive, he is easy company, and he has some quality that women respond to that the show doesn't entirely explain. The speech pattern doesn't seem to be an obstacle, or perhaps it is an obstacle that some people find charming. I've met people like this in real life, individuals whose eccentricities of communication become part of their appeal rather than a barrier to connection. He has a brother named Patch who appears in one episode. Patch has the same speech pattern, the same general appearance, the same easy manner. He and Boomhauer briefly compete for the same woman. The episode is one of the few times the show deepens. Boomhauer's personal world in a way that sticks. We learn something about where he comes from, what his family is like, and by extension, something about why he is the way he is. His family background otherwise remains largely unexplored. The show seems to have made a conscious decision to preserve Boomhauer's mystery. He is the least examined of the 4 alley guys, the one the show points its analytical eye at least often. Part of what makes the series finale's revelation so satisfying is that it comes after 12 seasons of deliberate withholding, the finale. To Sirloin with Love is the series finale of King of the Hill. Dale picks it up. In the finale, Boomhauer's wallet flips open after he leaves it behind, revealing his badge. And there, visible for just a moment, is a badge. Texas Ranger. This is the best deployed reveal in the show's history, possibly one of the better deployed reveals in animated comedy history. It was never set up. There was subtle foreshadowing, scattered hints, and small law enforcement details in earlier episodes that place Boom How R in that context. It simply appears at the very end, this fact about a man we've known for years, and immediately everything clicks slightly differently. Of course, the easy confidence, the competence underneath the surface, the lifestyle that doesn't quite map to unemployed electrical engineer on compensation. The sense that Boom How R's life is larger than what the alley sees of it. Texas Rangers are, for context, a historic statewide investigative division of the Texas Department of Public Safety in Texas, a largely plainclothes investigative branch with a long history. They deal with serious crimes, organized crime, major felonies, things that go beyond local jurisdiction. Boom How R has been all along secretly a Texas Ranger, standing in the alley with his Alamo beer, mumbling incomprehensibly about women and trucks and whatever else, while also being someone who presumably carries a firearm and investigates serious criminal activity. He has never mentioned this to his friends. This is either professional discretion or an extreme version of the show's general philosophy about men not talking about what actually matters in their lives. Either interpretation is consistent with what we know about the alley culture. In the revival, season 14, Boom How ER is in a relationship and helping to raise his girlfriend's teenage son. For a character who spent the entire original run as a devoted bachelor, this is a significant evolution. The details are sparse, but the implication is that Boom How R, somewhere in the 15-year gap, allowed someone close enough to matter. The son is a new relationship for him, caretaking, responsibility for a young person, investment in a future that isn't just his own. Given how little Boom How ER's inner life has ever been visible, this is a substantial development. It also makes a kind of sense for where he might end up. Boom How ER is beneath the mumbling and the dating and the mystery, a decent person. He is reliable, he shows up. He is the kind of man who, if someone needed him, would be there without a lot of fanfare about it. The fact that he's extending this to a partner and her child feels like the show saying, this is who he always was. We just couldn't see it clearly before. The speech pattern, by the way, is based on something real. Mike Judge has mentioned that it came from his experience of how certain Texan voices sound when heard over the phone, a kind of compression and elision that can make speech difficult to parse if you're not used to it. He took that quality and amplified it into something that reads as its own specific sound. It is one of the more recognizable voice performances in animation precisely because it doesn't sound like any other cartoon character voice. Boom How ER is sui generis. His voice is his alone. Jeffrey Dexter, Boom How are the third. Texas Ranger, the most mysterious man in an alley of complicated men. What I find particularly interesting about the Boom How mystery is that the show never seems frustrated by it. Some shows treat their opaque characters as problems to be resolved, the quiet one who will eventually open up, the closed-off person who will have their breakthrough episode where they finally talk about the thing. Boom How very rarely has that episode. The mystery is maintained with total consistency. There is at least one moment of deliberate revelation, an episode where we're explicitly invited inside his head. The Texas Ranger reveal is about the closest thing, and even that comes with no explanation, just the badge, visible for a moment, and then the show ends. I've always liked that about him. He is the show's reminder that you can know someone for 30 years and still not know them fully, and that this is fine. The alley doesn't need Boom How to be legible. It just needs him to show up. There are a few Boom How details worth mentioning that don't fit neatly elsewhere. He drives a Dodge Coronet at one point, which is a car that communicates a very specific set of priorities and which somehow perfectly fits a character you know almost nothing else about. He is, at various points, revealed to be a good shot, an excellent dancer, and the person in the group most likely to succeed in any physical challenge, all of which tracks with the Texas Ranger reveal if you're reading backwards. There's a quality to the boom how ER mystery that I want to try to articulate, because I think it does something specific for the show. The other three alley guys are legible. You can read them. Hank's interior life is visible through his behavior. You can trace the connection between his upbringing and his current emotional architecture. You can understand why he does the things he does. Dale's conspiracy theories are a comprehensible response to a worldview that needs the world to be more meaningful than it is. Bill's depression is comprehensible as the aftermath of loss and the difficulty of rebuilding. You know where these people come from and why they are the way they are. Boom, how ER is opaque. His motivations are rarely examined. His history is largely unwritten. The relationships we see him in come and go without much narrative weight behind them. He is pleasant company, competent, reliable, but the machinery that produces him is hidden. And I think what this does for the show is give the alley a door that doesn't fully open. There's always something about boom, however, that you haven't quite figured out yet, something that might be interesting if the show wanted to go there. That possibility of an unexplored depth creates a kind of attention that keeps him interesting even when he doesn't have much to do in a given episode. He is a show's unsolved problem in the best possible sense. The Texas Ranger reveal is the closest the show ever comes to opening that door. And then the show ends, so the door opens and immediately closes again. And you're left with the information that there is significantly more to Boom How ER than you ever saw, and the show has chosen not to show you most of it. That restraint is, I think, correct. The mystery is more interesting than the explanation would have been. There's a reason that Boom How ER is, for many fans, the one they feel most drawn to think about, the one whose life they most want to know more about. He earned that by being withheld. Jeffrey Dexter Boom Howard III, standing in the alley. Dangle. I tell you what, now let's talk about Nancy Gribbull, who is, in her own way, also a mystery. Except the mystery in her case is one that everyone except Dale has managed to solve. Before we get to the affair, and we will get to it, it's unavoidable. Let's spend a moment with Nancy Hicks Gribbull as a professional person, because she is actually quite good at her job, and this tends to get overshadowed by everything else about her. Nancy is a meteorologist and then eventually an anchor at Channel 84, AR Len's local news station. She is polished in the way that local news requires. She's good on camera, she can deliver information with the right kind of authority and warmth that local television demands. In a social circle that includes PAG E. Hill's Boggle Championships and Hank's propane career, Nancy is arguably the most genuinely successful person by conventional external metrics. She has a recognized professional presence in AR Len in a way that the others don't quite. She is also, for 14 years, conducting an affair that everyone around her knows about and her husband doesn't. Or doesn't consciously acknowledge. But we established in the Dale section that this is contested territory. John Redcorn is a licensed New Age healer, a former roadie for the band Winger, which I think about more than is probably healthy, and a musician who eventually turns to writing children's songs. He is Native American. He is visually quite striking, tall, with long, dark hair, angular features, a manner that sits somewhere between ceremonial dignity and slightly too earnest New Age energy. He provides therapeutic massages, generally to women clients, from his trailer. His stated reason for being in Nancy's life is that he treats her migraines. He is her healer. This is a story. The migraines are, by the time the show begins, essentially a joke. Everyone understands what the migraines are and aren't. And the comedy of Dale accepting the explanation without suspicion has been running for some time before we meet them. Voiced by Jonathan Joss, who had been in the role from essentially the beginning of the series and who was returning for the revival when he died in June 2025. He was killed in a confrontation outside his home in San Antonio. The revival dedicates an episode to his memory. It is worth naming this plainly because Joss was a significant part of what made John Redcorn work. The particular quality of his voice and the genuine seriousness he brought to a character who could have been played as pure comedy, and his loss is genuinely felt. The affair between Nancy and John Redcorn lasted 14 years by the show's accounting. It began sometime before the show starts, continued through the early seasons, and ended in the 4th season episode Nancy Boys, when Nancy makes the decision to recommit to Dale and end things with John Redcorn. A child resulted from the affair, Joseph, who is Dale's son in every legal and social sense, and John Redcorn's son in every biological sense. The mechanics of the comedy here, everyone knows. Dale doesn't. Joseph looks exactly like Redcorn, are fairly familiar as sitcom premises go. The executed version in King of the Hill is exceptional because the show takes all 3 people seriously. Nancy is not a villain, John Redcorn is not a cartoon antagonist, Dale is not merely comic relief. The situation has weight because these are actual characters with actual lives and actual feelings about what is happening. Nancy's moral situation across the run of the affair is handled with care. She is not shown as a happy adulterer with no conscience. She is shown as a woman who got into something she couldn't stop, who had genuine feelings for Redcorn, and who also genuinely loves Dale in a way that persists beneath the betrayal. Her eventual decision to end the affair is not portrayed as simple or easy. It costs her something. The episode in which she makes the decision at the local zoo, of all places, with Dale unknowingly making a declaration of love at the exact moment she's choosing him over Redcorn, has a genuine sweetness to it that doesn't excuse what she did but does make the outcome feel earned. The detail I always find most interesting about Nancy's family, her own mother, Bunny, turns out to have had a long-term affair of her own. It is revealed when Nancy is suffering from stress-induced hair loss over her guilt about the John Redcorn situation. Bunny confesses her own history, presumably as a form of absolution or solidarity. It is not presented as an excuse for Nancy's behavior. The show is careful not to let heredity become exculpation, but it does add dimension to who Nancy is. She came from a household where this happened. The pattern has precedent. John Redcorn's loss in all of this is genuinely moving when the show lets it be. He is the biological father of a boy he cannot claim. He has to watch Dale raise Joseph, has to watch Joseph grow up as a grib bull, as Dale's kid, taking on Dale's paranoid energy and enthusiasms rather than anything from Redcorn's side of his nature. His occasional attempts to get closer to Joseph are read by Joseph as creepy and unwanted. He is a father with no access to his son, and he arrived at this situation by his own choices, and the show lets him sit in that. He has genuine aspirations beyond the affair. His involvement in Native American rights advocacy is treated with a degree of seriousness. There is a storyline about him obtaining 12 acres of land through a federal settlement, which represents something real and meaningful, and then being manipulated into building a casino on land where the tribal treaties make that legally impossible in Texas. He loses the land effectively. This subplot does something King of the Hill is occasionally quite good at. It uses a specific individual story to gesture toward a larger systemic reality without making a lecture of it. John Redcorn got his land and then got taken advantage of within a legal framework that was not designed with his interests in mind. His music career, the children's songs, the performances at various A.R. Len venues with his band, Big Mountain Fudge Cake, is another dimension of him. He is a genuinely creative person who found an unlikely home in children's entertainment after years as a Rhodian healer. The show finds this funny without finding it contemptible. He takes his children's music seriously. It is what it is. Joseph grows up across the seasons into someone who is more like Dale than like either Nancy or Redcorn, which is one of the more honest things the show does. The received wisdom is that children inherit from their biological parents, and King of the Hill simply declines to go along with that entirely. Joseph is raised by Dale. Joseph becomes, in meaningful ways, Dale's son. He inherits Dale's paranoia, his social weirdness, his enthusiasms. This is nature nurture in action, and the show is on the nurture side without having to argue the point. The situation is never fully resolved within the original series in the way that a more dramatic show might resolve it. Dale doesn't find out in a dramatic confrontation scene. Nancy doesn't confess. John Redcorn doesn't reveal himself to Joseph. Everything simply continues. Nancy faithful to Dale in the show's later seasons, Redcorn on the periphery of Joseph's life, the neighborhood in possession of a secret it has collectively decided to keep. This collective decision, Hank and Peggy and the Alley guys all knowing and none of them telling Dale, is one of the show's more morally complicated ongoing situations. They have decided that the truth would be more harmful than the secret. Whether that is the right call is left genuinely open. It may be. Dale and Joseph have a real loving relationship that functions in ways that the truth might destroy. The show doesn't tell you whether protecting that relationship by withholding the truth is the right thing to do. It just shows you people making that choice and living with its ongoing weight. That's the Grib Bull household, a conspiracy theorist who may or may not be conspirating with himself, a meteorologist carrying a secret, a biological son who doesn't know he is one, a biological father writing children's songs from his trailer. John Redcorn's musical trajectory is also worth a pause. A former roadie for Winger, and yes, Winger, the band, a choice that is very funny and perfectly calibrated, becomes a licensed New Age healer and later frontman of the rock band Big Mountain Fudge Cake, who eventually writes and performs children's music. The children's music is his genuine creative outlet in later seasons. He performs it with complete sincerity. The show doesn't make the joke that it's a come down from his roadie days. It just shows him doing the thing he's doing with the earnestness he apparently brings to everything. There are episodes where Redcorn tries to get closer to Joseph through shared activity, teaching him about his Native American heritage, hosting vision quests, trying to find some angle that lets him be present in his son's life without being able to explain why he wants to be. Joseph generally finds him strange and a bit unsettling. Dale finds the whole arrangement unremarkable. The comedy of this triangle, biological father, legal father, son who doesn't know the difference, runs quietly underneath a lot of Grib Bull household episodes. What I think the show is doing with Redcorn in those episodes is something slightly uncomfortable, showing you a person who's being paid back for a bad choice in the most specific possible way. He wanted to be close to Nancy. He got to be close to Nancy. And the cost of that closeness is that he has a son he can never acknowledge, in a household he can only enter as a friend rather than a father. The punishment fits the crime, almost mathematically. And Redcorn, to his credit, doesn't argue with it. He made the choices. He lives in the consequences. It's a lot for one house across the street from a propane salesman. There's a dimension to the John Redcorn picture I haven't mentioned yet, which is about his relationship with Dale. They become friends. This is probably the most remarkable fact about the Grib Bull household situation, and it's easy to miss because the friendship develops quietly across the background of the show. Dale, the man whose wife has been conducting an affair right under his nose, develops a genuine friendship with John Redcorn. He helps Redcorn with the land lawsuit. Dale's conspiracy-adjacent legal knowledge and his willingness to fight institutional forces makes him a useful ally in that particular battle. He includes Redcorn in alley activities. He treats him as a neighbor and a friend. Redcorn has said in the show's dialogue that Dale's complete obliviousness really takes the fun out of it, which tells you something. The affair continued partly because of the transgression of it, the secret, the forbidden quality, the element of betrayal that gave it a charge. And Dale's absolute lack of suspicion removes that charge. There is no tension. There's nothing to hide from because nothing is being looked for. There is something almost beautiful in this, in the specific way that tragic comedy is beautiful. Dale's absolute trust in Nancy and in everyone around him creates a strange kind of safety, a safety that his behavior has arguably earned, in the sense that he is such a genuine threat to no one that no one feels any need to be defensive around him. He is threatening only in his delusions. In person, in the alley, with friends, he is completely harmless. And John Redcorn, who came into Dale's life as an antagonist and stayed as an interloper, ends up simply being Dale's friend. The person most wrong becomes the most trusting. There's a King of the Hill episode in there, worth noting before we leave the Gribb Bull household. Nancy's transformation across the series from someone conducting a double life to someone who is genuinely trying to be a faithful wife is handled without fanfare. There's no dramatic rehabilitation arc. She just stops, chooses, and continues. The later seasons show a Nancy who is more comfortable in her marriage, more invested in Dale, more present in the Gribb Bull household. It's not redemption exactly, it's just a different chapter, which is how a lot of real changes in people actually happen, not with a speech and a revelation and a dramatic scene, but with a decision and then the sustained effort of trying to be different. Nancy Gribb Bull makes that effort, and the show notes it without ceremony. The most quietly affecting thing about the Gribb Bull household, when I think about it from a distance, is the way the show uses it to say something about what love looks like in practice rather than in theory. Dale's love for Nancy is real. Nancy's eventual recommitment to Dale is real. John Redcorn's love for his son is real, even unacknowledged. Joseph's love for the man who raised him is real, regardless of biology. The household is full of genuine feeling in complicated configurations, and none of it resolves cleanly. And the show is honest about this. The honesty is what makes it worth spending time with. The Gribbles are a mess, so is every family that contains real people with real feelings. Peg E. Hill is next, who also makes efforts, though hers are in a very different direction entirely. Peg E. Hill is the multiple-time A.R. Len Boggle champion. I want to start there because it is her proudest credential, and it is also the least prestigious possible thing. Boggle is a word game played with lettered dice. The A.R. Len Boggle circuit is not large. The competition is presumably not fierce. And yet Peggy refers to her championship status with the quiet authority of someone who has achieved something that matters. And the show treats it with complete sincerity. There is no wink at the camera. Peggy is the Boggle champion. This is simply true, and she will bring it up when it's relevant and sometimes when it isn't. Margaret Peggy Hill is voiced by Kathy Najimy, and the character is built around one core comic premise. She has an enormous, impregnable self-image and a set of actual skills that does not remotely support it. The gap between who Peggy thinks she is and who Peggy actually is, that is the engine of her comedy. But here is what distinguishes Peggy from a simple figure of arrogance-based comedy. She's also genuinely kind. Beneath the obliviousness and the self-aggrandizement, Peggy Hill wants good things for people. She loves her family. She tries to help. When something actually matters, when someone she loves is in trouble, when a situation requires genuine courage or commitment, Peggy is usually there and usually doing the right thing, even if she arrives at it through a route that involves a lot of unnecessary self-congratulation. Her primary professional claim is that she is a substitute Spanish teacher at Tom Landry Middle School. She is not a good Spanish teacher. Her Spanish is catastrophically wrong in ways that are consistently funny because they are consistently confident. Peggy speaks her terrible Spanish with absolute conviction. She does not doubt it. She cannot hear the errors that are immediately obvious to anyone with actual knowledge of the language. The students who sat in her classes presumably came away with some interesting gaps in their education. The show does a clever thing with this, which is that it uses Peggy's Spanish to make a point about Peggy's general relationship with expertise. She knows she has a PhD-level understanding of Spanish. She doesn't. But she believes she does with such completeness that she cannot process evidence to the contrary. This is not unique to Peggy, it is a very recognizable human phenomenon, but the show uses it as the visible symptom of her broader condition. Her column in the AR Len Bystander is Peg E. Hill's Musings. She takes it seriously. It is a local newspaper column in a small Texas town, which is to say it reaches a very limited audience and has very limited cultural impact, but Peggy writes it with the intensity of someone producing work of national significance. The occasional episode where her column generates actual controversy in AR Len is one of the show's recurring comedic situations. Peggy writes something that she considers an insight, it lands differently than she expected, and she has to navigate the consequences. Her relationship with language is interesting beyond the Spanish. She believes she is a gifted writer. She is not, particularly. She believes she has a penetrating analytical mind. She has an enthusiastic one, which is not quite the same thing. Her grasp of facts is occasionally wobbly. There are episodes where she states things with great confidence that turn out to be wrong, and her adjustment to being corrected is always slightly delayed, as if she's waiting for the correction itself to be revealed as an error. The skydiving accident deserves its own moment. At the end of season 3, Peggy takes up skydiving for reasons that are typically Peggy. She wants to prove something to herself and possibly to Hank about her capacity for adventure and courage. Her chute doesn't open correctly. She is badly injured in the crash landing, broken bones, significant recovery required, a period of hospitalization and rehabilitation that carries into the next season. The recovery arc is handled with a seriousness that the show earns because it follows years of comedy around Peggy. You've laughed at her. Now the show asks you to feel something for her. And it works, not because the show suddenly becomes a different kind of show, but because the comedy has made Peggy real enough that her suffering lands. Her rehabilitation, which involves Cotton Hill of all people, essentially bullying her back into walking by refusing to accept her limitations, is one of the stranger and more moving sequences in the show's run. Cotton forcing Peggy to walk again through pure cantankerous refusal is a Cotton moment that complicates him in the way his best moments do. He is not gentle, he is not kind by most conventional measures, but he is effective. And there is something in his refusal to let her be limited that she needed, even though the delivery was unpleasant. Peggy's relationship with her own family is worth mention. Her mother, who appears in 2 different incarnations in the show, either a continuity error or an implied retcon that the show never addressed, is someone Peggy has a difficult relationship with. In later seasons, Peggy gives up on reconciliation and simply stops mentioning her. Her father, Doc Platt-Doer, appears in one episode where Hank and Bobby visit the family ranch. He's going somewhat senile and speaking in Old West metaphors, which Hank interprets as wisdom, and which Peggy treats with the exasperation of someone who has lived with this for decades. Her friendship with Nancy Grib Bull is genuine and complicated. They're competitive. There is a background dynamic around who is more successful, who has more status in AR Len's social world, where each of them ranks in the other's estimation. Nancy has a real career and is genuinely recognizable in AR Len. Peggy has her column and her Boggle Championship and her sense of herself as the intellectual and creative center of her household. The friendship persists underneath the competition because they are genuinely fond of each other, and because Peggy's world would be smaller without Nancy, and both of them know it. Her relationship with Luann, her niece, is maternal and competitive and affectionate in a way that defies easy summary. Peggy took Luann in because there was no one else, and because it was the right thing to do. She has also, over the years, been jealous of Luann, protective of Luann, dismissive of Luann, and proud of Luann. All of these coexist. The relationship is not simple because real relationships between women of different generations who are also family and also living in the same house are not simple. The thing about Peggy, the thing that makes her one of the most interesting characters in the show rather than just the most obvious comedic target, is that her delusions exist in genuine service of her survival. She needed to believe she was remarkable to keep going. The life of a substitute Spanish teacher in A.R.Len, Texas, wife of a propane salesman, mother of a child who doesn't follow any of the conventional paths. Without the self-image to anchor her, Peggy's life might be difficult to bear. The delusions are not merely funny, they are functional. And occasionally, not always, but occasionally she is right. The Boggle Championship is real. Some of her columns do land. Some of her instincts about people and situations are accurate. The show is careful not to make Peggy entirely wrong about herself because that would make her a caricature rather than a character. She is a woman with a somewhat inflated estimation of her abilities, who also genuinely has some abilities. The inflation is visible. The genuine abilities are real. Hank loves her. This is, finally, the most important thing about Peg E. Hill. Hank Hill, a man who is not always easy to love or to be loved by, who struggles with emotional expression, who has a narrow and specific vision of how things should be, chose Peggy. Has continued to choose her, finds her baffling and occasionally exhausting and also unmistakably the right person for him. Their marriage is not without friction, but it is real and it is solid and it is in its own way one of the most successful relationships in the show. A few specific Peggy moments are worth naming. There's an episode involving a Renaissance fair where Hank is trying to land a propane account and Peggy is assigned to be a house cleaning wench. She refuses to stay in character, refuses to behave as inferior to the men, and eventually starts a small rebellion among the female workers. The episode is funny as a Peggy episode, her self-regard colliding with an environment that demands deference, but it's also a situation where her inability to accept a subordinate role turns out to be, by the end, the more correct position to hold. The show does this occasionally, lets Peggy's excessiveness accidentally produce the right outcome. There's also the episode where she takes a standardized IQ test from a dubious institution called the Intelligence Institute of Texas and is declared a genius, after which she begins to act accordingly. She starts using the title. She tells people. She conducts herself with the specific gravity of someone who has finally received official confirmation of what they always suspected. The joke is that the test is clearly fraudulent and the institution is clearly not legitimate. The thing I find interesting about the episode is how perfectly it captures the psychology of confirmation bias. Peggy accepted the result instantly and without any skepticism precisely because it matched what she already believed about herself. She would have questioned a result that called her average. She did not question this one. Her newspaper column produces some of the show's more interesting minor subplots. She takes it extremely seriously, uses it to opine on various A.R.Len issues, and occasionally creates consequences she didn't anticipate. The column is a vehicle for her self-expression in a world that doesn't always create room for it. And even when the column's contents are questionable, the show is sympathetic to the impulse behind it. She wants to be heard. She wants to matter to her community in a way that goes beyond being someone's wife and someone's mother and someone's aunt. The column is that for her, and I think it's worth taking that seriously even when the column itself is absurd. She is, as she would be the first to tell you, remarkable, in ways that are not always the ways she thinks. The show depicts Peggy's self-belief as something that has real costs as well as real benefits, and it's worth staying with that for a moment. The clearest example of this is anything involving her IQ. In one episode, she takes an online IQ test run by the Intelligence Institute of Texas and is declared a genius. She accepts this immediately and without skepticism. She begins to act accordingly. The joke, of course, is that the Intelligence Institute of Texas is not a legitimate organization, and the test is not a legitimate measure of anything. But Peggy doesn't interrogate it because it confirms what she already believed. The confirmation bias is total. There are real consequences to this kind of self-belief in the show's world. Peggy occasionally overcommits to things she can't actually do. She occasionally harms people by acting with confidence and expertise she doesn't have. The Spanish teaching is the clearest example. Students in her class are actually learning incorrect Spanish, and this has practical implications for them. The show is not uncritical of Peggy in this respect. It finds her funny, but it also shows the costs of her particular variety of self-assurance. What distinguishes the show's treatment of her from Cruelty is that it's always clear these costs are unintentional. Peggy never wants to harm anyone. She's not a bad person. She's a person with a mistaken picture of herself who acts accordingly, and sometimes the acting accordingly has effects she doesn't intend and wouldn't choose. The other thing to say about Peggy is that she is, across the run of the show, one of its most generative comic characters. Episodes that center on Peggy tend to be energetic and funny in a way that episodes centered on some other characters aren't always. Kathy Najamy's voice performance is a significant part of this. There is something in the specific quality of how she delivers Peggy's confidence that is just funny, reliably, in a way that holds up across repeat viewings. I am perhaps being slightly unkind to Peggy here, which I don't mean to be. So let me end this section by saying, I think Peg E. Hill is one of the most fully realized female characters in animated comedy of her era. She is specific and consistent and has genuine warmth and genuine flaws, and a life that extends beyond her relationship to the male characters around her. She has her own projects, her own failures, her own ambitions. She is a complete person who happens to be significantly wrong about the extent of her abilities, which again is extremely relatable, if not always in quite the way she is. But before we leave the Hill household, there's Bobby to consider. The phrase, "that boy ain't right," is the most revealing thing Hank Hill ever says, and it reveals more about Hank than it does about Bobby. Because Bobby is fine. Bobby is, by many available measures, doing much better than fine. Bobby is a child who knows what he loves and pursues it without self-consciousness, and has more genuine warmth toward other people than almost anyone else in A.R. Len. But he is not what Hank expected. He does not have the shape that Hank recognizes as the shape of a good son. And so Hank's diagnosis, delivered in the alley with a mixture of frustration and bafflement, and something that is clearly love, even when it sounds like complaint, is, "that boy ain't right." Bob E. Hill is voiced by Pamela Adlon through the entire run of the original series and through the revival. This is worth noting because Adlon gives Bobby a specific quality, an earnest, undiscouraged energy, a commitment to his own enthusiasms that never becomes irritating because it is so genuine. Bobby does not perform in his interests for anyone. He simply has them. What are Bobby's interests? They are stand-up comedy, prop comedy, cooking, beauty products, hunting in his own way, competitive meat judging, bull riding, briefly, and the company of people. He is naturally sociable in the way that some people simply are. He walks into rooms and they get warmer. He does not understand why some people find things embarrassing that he doesn't find embarrassing. He has a very high tolerance for being different because he has never quite understood why being different would be a problem. His love of comedy is worth spending a moment with. Bobby genuinely studies it. He has comedy records. He thinks about what makes things funny and how timing works and what the relationship is between a setup and a punchline. This is not casual enthusiasm. This is the interest of someone who has found something they actually care about and are willing to put real thought into. He performs at school, he performs in the alley, he performs whenever he gets the chance. And the show is fairly honest about this, actually quite funny. Not always, and in ways that aren't always appropriate to the situation, but genuinely. His cooking is the other major gift. Bobby can cook. He has palate, he has instinct, he has an interest in food that goes beyond simply eating it. The show develops this over several seasons, and it becomes a recurring way that he and Hank find common ground because Hank, whatever his views on cooking as a masculine pursuit, does genuinely love food. He respects quality in a steak. He knows what good beef tastes like. Bobby's ability to identify, prepare, and judge quality meat becomes a point of connection between them that doesn't require Hank to revise his values, only to extend his recognition. In season 14 of the revival, Bobby is in his 20s and working as a chef in Dallas at a Japanese-German fusion restaurant. He lives with Joseph. He seems, by all available evidence, happy and settled in a way that feels earned. The boy who ain't right turned out to be the one in the show who figured out who he was earliest and had the least confusion about it. Bobby's relationship with Hank is the emotional core of the show in a way I don't think is always fully acknowledged. The Hank-Bobby dynamic is what the show is about, underneath everything else. Everything else, the alley guys, Cotton, Peggy, the propane, is context. The question the show is asking, episode after episode across years, can these two people, who love each other and cannot easily find each other, find a way to actually reach each other? And the answer is yes, slowly, partially, imperfectly, and through unexpected channels. Not through Hank becoming a different kind of father, but through him becoming a slightly expanded version of himself. Not through Bobby conforming to Hank's expectations, but through Bobby being himself in ways that eventually produce moments Hank can respond to. Bobby Goes Nuts is one of the episodes that gets discussed most often in the context of Bobby's character, and I want to talk about it for a moment. The premise: Hank cannot teach Bobby to fight. Bobby is not built for fighting in the way Hank is equipped to teach it. Hank finds this troubling. Bobby, characteristically, solves the problem practically. He takes a women's self-defense class. The women's self-defense class teaches Bobby to kick men in the groin. This is a reliable, non-strength dependent technique. Bobby applies himself to it. He becomes extremely proficient. He becomes, in fact, so unafraid of physical confrontation that he somewhat over-applies the skill to situations that don't quite require it. The episode is very funny. It is also making a small, real point about how there is more than one way to be safe in the world, and that the methods the conventional masculine framework offers are not the only available ones. Hank is uncomfortable. Bobby is fine. Bobby's relationship with Kon Isupunu Sinphone runs through several seasons and is one of the show's more sweetly depicted young relationships. It is on again and off again and runs into the various complications that young relationships run into. Parental disapproval. Kon does not consider Bobby an appropriate match. Differences in ambition and focus. The general unsteadiness of being 13 and trying to have a relationship. But it is also genuine. They like each other. They are kind to each other. When the show brings them back together, it feels right. Bobby's comedy instincts produce several of the show's best episode premises. He once befriends a group of older Latino kids who he thinks are his comedy audience, and it turns out they were laughing at him rather than with him. His response to this realization, when it comes, is handled with unusual emotional intelligence for a 13-year-old and for a comedy character in general. He feels genuinely hurt, processes it, and moves forward. Bobby does this a lot. He gets hurt, and he doesn't let it break him, partly because his sense of self is more robust than his father's, and partly because he is constitutionally inclined toward optimism. There is a version of Bobby that I think about sometimes, which is Bobby as the show's emotional intelligence. He is the one who sees people most clearly, who has the least investment in the defensive postures that the show's other characters maintain. He sees Hank's repression for what it is without resenting it. He sees Dale's paranoia as Dale rather than as a character flaw to be corrected. He sees Bill's sadness and responds to it with uncomplicated compassion. He is the show's most emotionally available person, which is perhaps why the show structured things so that his main relationship is with the one who is least available. The meat judging. I want to return to this. It surfaces in the later seasons, and the image of Bobby in competition, confident, knowledgeable, applying a specific expertise with genuine skill, and then the image of Hank watching him is one of those moments that the show has spent years building toward. Hank's face in that moment contains multitudes. He is proud. He is recognizing something. He is discovering that his son, who is not the son he expected, is someone worth watching. It is not a dramatic scene. Nothing is said that hasn't been said before in some form, but it lands, and it lands because of everything that came before it. That boy ain't right. He's the most right person in AR Len, Hank. He just doesn't look like what you thought right was supposed to look like. There are a few more Bobby moments I want to touch on before we move to the wider supporting cast. The Mac Sennett School of Comedy episode, I can't remember the exact title, but I know the episode, where Bobby decides he wants to study comedy more formally and ends up at some kind of comedy school. The tension between wanting to develop a real interest formally and the risk of having the joy processed out of it by formal instruction is something the show approaches thoughtfully. Bobby's comedy works when it comes from his natural instincts, and the episode is partly about what happens when you try to systematize something that lives in the person rather than in the technique. There's also the thread across several episodes of Bobby's relationship with food and cooking developing into something more serious than a hobby. The meal judging episodes are the clearest examples, but there are also smaller moments. Bobby helping in the kitchen, Bobby having opinions about cuts of meat and cooking methods that turn out to be correct, Bobby using his palate in ways that slowly earn Hank's respect. The cooking connection between them is the most reliable bridge they have, the clearest language they share. Bobby's relationship with J.O. Seth Grib Bull is one of the show's more comfortably drawn friendships. Joseph is Bobby's best friend, and the dynamic is a good one. Joseph is the one who's willing to do the slightly wilder or more reckless things, and Bobby is the one who's more thoughtful and emotionally aware. And together they function as a reasonably complete person. Joseph, as noted in the Dale section, develops over time into a sort of Dale in training, taking on the paranoia and the conspiratorial energy of the man who raised him. And Bobby absorbs this without losing himself in it. His friendship with Joseph is affectionate and accepting, which is characteristic of how Bobby relates to most people. In the revival, Bobby living with Joseph as adults in Dallas is one of those details that lands right. Of course they're still living together. Of course they've maintained the friendship into adulthood. It's the most natural thing in the world, and the show treats it as such, not as a big deal, not as a punchline, just as the thing that happened. Bobby Hill is one of those characters who doesn't always get the credit he deserves in discussions of the show because the conversations tend to center on Hank, or Cotton, or Dale, or Bill, the more conventionally dramatic or comedic figures. But Bobby is, I think, where the show's deepest investment lies. He is the future that all the complexity of the present is working toward. A person who came out of Hank Hill's household able to be himself fully and without apology. That's the outcome the show was arguing for across 13 seasons. There's an episode where Bobby gets deeply into stand-up comedy and starts studying it formally. And there's a tension in it between the authentic interest and the risk of processing it into technique. The episode makes a small, true observation. That comedy done from instinct is different from comedy done from training, and that Bobby's particular gift lives in the instinct. When he tries to fit his material into structures someone else taught him, it gets worse. When he goes back to just being himself, it gets better. This is, as far as I can tell, accurate information about how comedy actually works. The cooking episodes build gradually, and I'd argue they form the most coherent character arc in Bobby's storyline. He starts with an interest that nobody around him takes seriously as a masculine pursuit. He develops it anyway. He gets good. The meat judging competitions in the later seasons are the culmination, events that require exactly the kind of refined, specific sensory expertise that Bobby has quietly been developing for years, and that Hank has the vocabulary to understand and respect even if cooking was never what he wanted for his son. The moment when Hank watches Bobby compete in one of those competitions, the expression on Hank's face, which is pride with something like relief mixed into it, the recognition of competence in his son that he didn't know how to look for before, is one of the quieter great moments in the show's run. Nothing is said about it. The camera just holds on Hank watching Bobby, and that's sufficient. He ain't right in Hank's initial estimation. He's exactly right in the show's final one. The wider world of A.R. Len calls. Luana, the Sufanuzen phones, and the various other people who orbit the Hill household are worth their own time. Luann Platt-Er's backstory is fairly dark, but before we get to the darkness, let's note what she actually is. A young woman with a genuine talent for automotive mechanics who ended up living in her aunt and Uncle Hank and Pieg E. Hill's house because her own home fell apart, and who is trying to build something in spite of that. Luann Platt-Er, 19 years old when the show begins. Voiced by Brittany Murphy throughout the original run, Murphy died in December 2009, not long after the original series ended, and her absence from the revival is handled off-screen. The character's fate in the years between the original series and season 14 is not directly addressed, which is probably the most respectful possible approach to a situation without a comfortable resolution. Her parents, Hoyt Platt-Er, Peggy's fraternal twin brother, is absent and unreliable throughout Luann's life. Her mother, Leanne, is an alcoholic who is serving a prison sentence when the show begins. She stabbed Hoyt with a fork, which is the kind of detail that sounds like a joke and is actually a fairly grim indicator of what Luann's home life was like before she ended up on Rainy Street. Leanne is released from prison at one point during the series and attempts to re-enter Luann's life with mixed results. She also becomes romantically involved with Bill, which is one of those King of the Hill situation combinations that sounds like it shouldn't work as a storyline and then does, because the show takes everyone in it seriously enough to make the situation real. Luann's early characterization is as a stereotypically attractive young woman who is also, somewhat against expectation, extremely competent mechanically. She can fix an engine. This is treated matter-of-factly in the earlier seasons. She is a beautician in training, but she is also someone who knows how cars work, and both of these things are just true about her simultaneously. Her trajectory changes significantly in the season 2 finale when her boyfriend Buckley is killed in the Lomart explosion. This is the show's first significant dramatic event, and it lands because the show has done enough work in the first season to make the characters real. Luann's grief is handled with more care than you'd expect from a first-season animated comedy. The aftermath, her loss, her process, her eventual recovery, runs through several episodes and changes who she is slightly. She's more serious after Buckley, at least for a while. She has a recurring puppet show called Manger Babies, in which sock puppets representing biblical characters perform various scenarios. This is an entirely Luann invention, and it is one of the show's more quietly absurd running elements because Luann is completely sincere about it. The Manger Babies are not a joke to her. They are a creative project, a form of expression, something she made and cares about. The show's comedy around them is largely generated by the gap between how Luann views them and how everyone else does. Lucky first appears in the episode The Redneck on Rainy Street. Lucky Klein Schmidt, whose first name is Elroy, and whose nickname comes from having successfully sued a Costco or similar big box retailer after slipping on urine, resulting in a settlement that he has been living on ever since. He is 38. She's in her early 20s. He is voiced by Tom Petty. I want to let that sit for a moment. Tom Petty, the rock musician, voiced a recurring character on King of the Hill for several seasons with complete commitment and zero self-consciousness. He plays Lucky as a good-natured Texas hillbilly with simple pleasures and a genuine sweetness. He and Luann get married. They have a daughter named Gracie Margaret. Tom Petty died in October 2017, and Lucky's likely absence from the revival therefore carries the same weight as Luann's, a character who is simply gone from the story, with the gap acknowledged quietly rather than through plot mechanics. The Sufanuzen phones require more attention than they often get in discussions of the show, because they are more interesting characters than their initial function as comic foil neighbors would suggest. Consupunusin phone is Laotian American. He works in the information technology industry as a systems analyst, and he has an enormous chip on his shoulder about not being recognized as the accomplished person he is. His initial dynamic with Hank is combative. He dismisses Hank as a simple redneck. Hank misidentifies Can's ethnicity repeatedly in the early seasons. And the conflict between them is played partly as culture clash and partly as the comedy of two difficult men who don't have a natural social grammar for each other. The show complicates Can considerably in the later seasons, and I think this is where he becomes the most interesting character in the Supu Nusin phone house. There is a storyline revealing that he has bipolar disorder, periods of mania characterized by overambition and grandiosity, followed by depressive episodes where he retreats and loses himself. This detail is handled with more care than you might expect from a show like this. The bipolar disorder is not played for cheap comedy. It is presented as a real condition with real effects on Can and the people around him, and his navigation of it, the medication, the management, the relationship with his family during bad periods, is shown with something approaching clinical accuracy. Can's relationship with his daughter Connie is also worth examining. He has extremely high expectations of her: classical violin, academic excellence, the right social connections, the right eventual career. Connie is excellent at most of the things she applies herself to, and also carries the weight of her father's projections in a way that produces its own complications. Her friendship with Bobby is partly significant because Bobby asks nothing of her. He doesn't care about her grades or her violin or her future plans. He just likes being around her. This is clarifying. Min, Can's wife, is a formidable person in her own right, and I'd argue slightly underutilized across the run. She and Peggy have a friendship competition dynamic that mirrors in some ways what Hank and Can have: ongoing one-upmanship beneath a genuine mutual regard. Min is sharper than she initially appears and has a dry, direct quality that makes her scenes interesting whenever she's given proper room. Connie herself, Can Jr., as she's sometimes called, is one of the more grounded presences in the show's younger generation. She is intelligent without being insufferable about it, ambitious without being unkind, and has a genuine warmth that doesn't disappear when her father's being ridiculous. In the revival, she is studying engineering at UT Dallas. Buck Strickland, Hank's boss, is worth a brief portrait here because he is a significant recurring presence in Hank's professional life, and a character who illustrates something specific about a certain kind of Texas businessman. Buck is, by most objective measures, not a good man. He has cheated on his wife. He has had various legal entanglements. He has, on at least one occasion, been willing to frame Hank for a crime he didn't commit. He has had multiple heart attacks and cardiovascular events, which the show tracks with the specific consistency you'd expect from writers who have committed to a character detail. And yet he is also the person who calls Hank his golden goose, who knows genuinely that Hank is the reason Strick land propane functions and continues to be profitable. His exploitation of Hank is not blind to Hank's value. It is aware of Hank's value and continues anyway. This is a particular kind of workplace dynamic that a lot of people recognize from their own lives. The boss who knows you're the reason things work and uses that as a reason to rely on you more rather than to reward you better. Hank's loyalty to Buck, which persists through things that would cause most reasonable people to look for a different employer, is one of the more extreme expressions of Hank's general tendency to define himself through his professional role. Strickland Propane is where Hank is who he is. Leaving it would require him to redefine himself, and Hank does not easily redefine himself. The alley's wider network of recurring characters includes Hank's half-Japanese brother Ju, Enichiro, who appears in the returning Japanese episodes, and who is, as noted in the Cotton section, eerily similar to Hank in ways that function as a kind of reflection. Cotton's wartime buddies, Topsy, Stinky, and Bug, who age and diminish in the background of Cotton's storylines. Dooley, who goes to school with Bobby and delivers every observation in a flat, affectless voice that the show uses for extremely specific comedic effect. And various neighbors, school officials, and strict land propane colleagues who appear and disappear as episodes require them. Buck Strick Land deserves a bit more time than I've given him so far because he's one of those supporting characters who does significant work in defining the protagonist without being a protagonist himself. His entire function in Hank's life is to be the father figure that Cotton couldn't be, the man in authority over Hank who actually appreciates Hank's competence and relies on it. The relationship is exploitative in ways Hank understands and doesn't quite name. Buck calls Hank his golden goose, and means it literally. Hank is the reason Strickland propane stays afloat. And Buck knows this and uses it as the reason he would never actually fire Hank rather than as a reason to reward him properly. Buck's health is a running subtext. He has had numerous cardiac events across the series, various cardiovascular procedures, and a general physical deterioration that the show tracks with the specific consistency you'd expect from writers who've committed to a character detail. In the revival, he's retired to a nursing home, still alert, still making occasional business decisions remotely. Still, apparently, Buck. Lucky is another character who gets somewhat underserved in discussions of the show, possibly because Tom Petty voiced him, and Petty's death in 2017 means the character couldn't return to the revival in the same form. But Lucky is actually quite interesting as a character type, a man who has achieved the specific Texas dream of never having to work again, funded by a slip-and-fall lawsuit, living simply and contentedly. He doesn't want more than he has. He's happy with Luann, he's happy with Gracie, he's happy with his life. In a show full of characters struggling with the gap between what they wanted and what they got, Lucky is the one who simply adjusted his wants downward and became perfectly content. There's something the show finds quietly funny about this, and something it almost respects. Bill's Louisiana family, the Dottereeves, are worth a quick mention because those episodes represent the show doing something it doesn't do often enough, which is placing a main character in a context that predates A.R. Len and reveals things about them that A.R. Len doesn't know. Gilbert D.O.H. Trave, Bill's cousin, is a recurring presence in those episodes, more flamboyant, more settled in himself, more comfortable with the weirdness of the D.O.H. Trev family history than Bill has ever been. The contrast between Gilbert's ease in his own skin and Bill's decades-long discomfort in his suggests that Bill's unhappiness is not the inevitability of his circumstances, but the result of specific choices and specific wounds, which is maybe the most hopeful thing the show ever implies about Bill, that it didn't have to be this way. The world of A.R. Len is well populated, it rewards attention. I want to spend a moment more on the Sufanusen phones specifically, because their presence in the show does something that I find genuinely interesting when I think about it. Khan's desire to be accepted, to be recognized as the accomplished person he is, to not be dismissed as simply the Asian neighbor by people who can't even correctly identify his country of origin. This is a real experience that the show depicts with more precision than a quick description of the comedy would suggest. The running gag that everyone assumes Khan is Chinese or Japanese is funny, but it is also an accurate depiction of a thing that actually happens to people who look like Khan in communities like A.R. Len. The show's treatment of this is notably respectful. Khan is not simply the punchline of a joke about racism. He is a fully realized character with ambitions and insecurities and a family and a mental health history, and the ethnic ignorance around him is part of his context rather than his whole character. The show trusts the viewer to understand the difference between depicting racism and endorsing it. His relationship with Hank over the course of the series is a slow thaw, not a dramatic reconciliation, not a sudden moment of mutual understanding, but the gradual, accumulated erosion of their initial mutual dismissiveness through proximity and shared experience. By the later seasons, they are something more than adversaries, not quite friends, but people who have learned to see each other as people. This is perhaps the show's most understated character arc. Cotton's immediate identification of Khan as Laotian in their first meeting, Cotton explaining that soldiers were trained to distinguish between Asian nationalities during the war creates this strange, unlikely moment of accurate recognition that Khan has been denied by everyone else in A.R. Len. Cotton and Khan are voiced by the same actor. They share a particular quality of defiant pride. Their mutual recognition is not exactly friendship, but it is something real. The Nine Rivers Country Club, the club that exclusively admits Asian Americans, becomes relevant in the Supu Nu Sin Phone storylines as a goal. The kind of social recognition and acceptance that Khan wants, filtered through the irony that the acceptance he can achieve is itself based on a form of ethnic sorting. The show handles this with its usual light touch. The irony is visible, the characters navigate it sincerely, and no one explains the joke. A.R. Len is a small city with more in it than initially appears. That's probably true of most places if you know where to look. Specific episodes are worth dwelling on, and we should get to them. Cotton rides a rented horse into Bobby's birthday party. That's how Shins of the Father begins, and it immediately establishes everything you need to know about Cotton Hill in his first physical appearance in the show. The episode aired in March 1997, the 8th episode of the first season, and it does several things at once. Introduces Cotton as a physical presence after he's existed mostly in Hank's anxious references to him. Establishes the Hank-Cotton dynamic in active rather than theoretical terms. And demonstrates that the show is willing to let its comedy have real emotional stakes. Cotton arrives, gives Bobby a shotgun for his birthday, takes Bobby to a bar, slaps the waitress, influences Bobby to replicate his behavior with Peggy, and generally wreaks a specific kind of domestic havoc. The comedy is real, but underneath it is Hank's entire relationship with his father in compressed form. The inability to confront, the wish that things were different, the loyalty that persists despite everything. The episode makes Cotton funny and also makes him costly in a way that matters. There's a detail I've always loved in this episode, which is Cotton's immediate, accurate identification of Khan's ethnicity as Laotian. Everyone else in A.R. Len has been guessing wrong. Cotton gets it right in seconds and explains, without particular emotion, that during the war, soldiers were taught to tell the difference. It is darkly funny and also probably accurate, and it creates this brief, strange moment where Cotton, the most difficult character in the show's roster, is also the only one who sees Khan correctly. The Meg Lomart explosion at the end of Season 1 and beginning of Season 2, Propane Boom and its follow-up, is worth mentioning as a turning point rather than a comedic set piece. Buckley, Luann's boyfriend, dies. This is the show's first major dramatic death, and it signals that the show is willing to have consequences. Luann's grief in the aftermath is treated with genuine care. The show doesn't rush through it. Buckley's absence is felt for a while. A Firefighting We Will Go, Season 3, is probably the most formally inventive episode of the original run. The Alley Guys join the volunteer fire department and accidentally burn the firehouse down. The episode is structured as overlapping flashbacks, a Rashomon-style construction in which each character remembers the events differently, and the comedy comes from the gaps between the versions. For a network animated comedy in 2000, this is genuinely ambitious structurally. It's also very funny. The episode demonstrates that the show's creativity wasn't limited to character writing, it extended to form. Nancy Boys, Season 4, is where the affair storyline resolves. Nancy ends things with John Redcorn and chooses Dale. I've discussed the setup extensively in the section on that part of the show, but the episode itself is worth a specific mention because of how it handles the resolution. It doesn't have a big, dramatic scene. The moment where Nancy makes her choice is quiet, almost casual. Dale does something small and sincere and unwittingly romantic at the zoo, and Nancy sees it, and that's enough. The show doesn't ask you to entirely forgive Nancy. It just shows her making a decision and shows you the moment that precipitated it. John Redcorn's quiet acceptance of being turned down is the episode's emotional center. He doesn't argue. He doesn't make a scene. He accepts it. The man who has been Nancy's lover simply folds, because Dale has done something that Redcorn, for all his qualities, cannot compete with. Been Dale. Loved her specifically as she is, without agenda or strategy, just because he does. Bobby Goes Nuts, Season 5, is one of the most purely funny episodes of the run, and also one of the more quietly subversive ones. Bobby, unable to fight in the way Hank can teach him, finds his own solution. The women's self-defense class, the groin kick. His total, fearless mastery of it. There's a sequence where Bobby applies this skill to various AR-Len inhabitants who probably don't deserve it, which the show plays brilliantly. But the underlying observation that effective self-protection doesn't have to look like what Hank expects it to look like is real and small and true. Cotton's plot, early in Season 7, is one of the better Cotton-centric episodes in terms of giving him genuine dimension beyond his role as Hank's difficult father. The plot involves Cotton trying to secure his burial plot at the Texas State Cemetery, and it contains one of the moments where Cotton's capacity for unexpected warmth surfaces clearly. These moments are never presented as redemptive. Cotton is not redeemed, and the show isn't interested in redeeming him, but they are real, and they make him more than a comic antagonist. The unbearable blindness of laying, the title is a Kundera pun, which is a very specific kind of joke for King of the Hill to make, is the episode where Hank goes temporarily blind from a psychosomatic reaction to something he witnessed that the show handles with complete commitment to a joke it has no business being this dedicated to. I won't fully describe it because the episode is better experienced than described, but it is one of the show's weirder premises and it works. Death Picks Cotton, Season 12. We've discussed it in the Cotton section, but it's worth reiterating as an episode in itself. It's one of the best things the show ever produced. Cotton's death by spite, Peggy's final declaration, the specific rightness of the ending. It is a kind of TV comedy that can contain an actual death and make it both funny and genuinely moving without either quality undermining the other. The finale, To Sirloin with Love, is the episode the show chose to end on. And the choice is right. Hank enters Bobby in a beef judging competition. Bobby wins. Hank's pride is quiet. That's it. That's the finale of a 13-season animated series. A father watching his son win a competition about meat. The show ended where it started, in the small, specific Texan particulars of these people's lives, with the emotional weight of a long relationship quietly present underneath the ordinary surface. There's a quality to the best King of the Hill episodes that I find difficult to describe and easy to feel, which is a kind of restraint. The show doesn't tell you how to feel, it doesn't score the moment with music that announces its significance. It just shows you the thing and trusts you to feel what you feel about it. The Hank Bobby meat judging moment doesn't have a speech. There's no moment where Hank says something direct about finally understanding his son. There is just the watching and the expression and the accumulated weight of everything that came before it. I think that restraint is the show at its most honest. Life's significant moments often don't announce themselves. You only know them later, in retrospect, as the thing that mattered. The show understands this. Its best episodes feel like life in that specific way. There are, of course, dozens of other episodes worth talking about. The one where Hank is accused of domestic abuse due to a misunderstanding that escalates through bureaucratic systems in ways Hank cannot navigate. The one where Peggy is kidnapped by a drug dealer who mistakes her for a drug mule, which is perhaps the show's most dramatic premise single episode. The Renaissance Fair episodes, the episodes about Hank's various professional crises at Strict Land Propane. The Dale Goes to Extremes episodes, of which there are many. The show ran 269 episodes. Not all of them are classics. Some of the later seasons, after Altshuler and Krinsky took over from Daniels in Season 7, lean harder into broader comedy and produce episodes that feel somewhat less grounded than the early peak. But even in the weaker stretches, there's usually something real, a character moment, a specific joke, a detail that feels true, that justifies the episode. 259 episodes across the original run, 28 years from premiere to the revival, 15 years in the gap between the finale and the new season. A lot of AR Len, and the show managed to make all of that specific enough to matter. I want to dwell a little more on what makes the best episodes work structurally because I think it says something about why the show aged as well as it did. The show's best episodes tend to start from a very small premise, not a high concept premise, not what if Hank accidentally gets involved in organized crime, or what if the alley guys go to Las Vegas. The premise is something like Hank can't find the right lawn seed. Hank finds out he can't shoot straight when he tries to bond with Bobby over target shooting. Peggy thinks she's a genius. Bobby has taken up comedy. These premises are small enough that the episodes have to generate their drama and their comedy from the characters rather than from the situation. The situation is just a frame. The content is the people. This is a harder kind of television to write than it sounds. High concept premises essentially write themselves. The situation generates the conflict, and you just have to follow the logic of the situation until it resolves. Character-generated episodes require you to know your characters well enough to know what they would do in a low-stakes situation. And to find that interesting, King of the Hill did this reliably across hundreds of episodes, and that's not an accident. It requires sustained investment in who these people are. The other structural quality of the best episodes is that the A and B stories parallel each other thematically rather than just running alongside each other. The Hank plot and the Peggy plot might both be about the same underlying question, about pride, about self-knowledge, about what it means to admit you're wrong, approached from different directions. When they come together at the end, or when they illuminate each other without actually connecting, the episode lands harder than either storyline would alone. A firefighting We Will Go works this way. The overlapping versions of events are all about the same basic question of how memory and ego interact to produce the story we tell about ourselves. The Rashomon structure is not just a formal trick, it is formally expressive of what the episode is about. The show also understands timing in a way that is underappreciated. Not joke timing, though the show is good at that too. The timing of when to be funny and when to be serious within an episode. The show is capable of moments of genuine pathos. Bill in the alley at night, clearly not okay. Hank watching Bobby and feeling something complicated. Cotton on his deathbed being Cotton right to the end. And these moments work because the comedy around them has kept things light enough that the shift in register registers as a shift. If everything is serious, nothing is. The show earns its emotional moments by not overusing them. The best King of the Hill episodes feel to me like they're about something real, not in the sense of addressing important social issues, though the show sometimes does that too, but in the sense of depicting a real human situation with precision, a real kind of loneliness, a real kind of pride, a real kind of love that doesn't know how to express itself. That level of precision is what separates the show from a great many of its animated contemporaries, and it's what allowed it to build the audience it eventually built even after its original run ended. A few more episodes I want to mention before we leave this territory. Hank's Dirty Laundry is the one where Hank discovers a charge for a pornographic film at a video store, a film he definitely didn't rent. And rather than just paying the $40 and letting it go, he fights the charge because his reputation is at stake and he will not pay for something he didn't do. The episode is perfect, Hank, a man for whom the principle is worth more than the cost, who will spend months fighting a $40 charge because it is a charge for something he did not do, and he refuses to say otherwise. It's a comedy episode about honor. The show means it. Hank's Bully is an episode I think about when I think about the show at its most specific. A young boy in the neighborhood bullies Hank, not Bobby, Hank himself, and the episode is about how Hank's usual frameworks for dealing with conflict don't apply to a situation where the antagonist is a child. He can't confront the kid the way he'd confront an adult. He can't ignore it without feeling diminished. Every avenue is blocked by the specific absurdity of being genuinely bothered by a child. The episode takes this very seriously and is very funny. There is also, for sheer audacity of premise, the episode where Peggy is manipulated by a death row inmate into unknowingly acting as a drug mule. This is as far from the show's usual register as it ever gets. Peggy, alone in a foreign country, in genuine danger, with nobody coming for her immediately. The show plays it straight. Peggy has to get herself out through her own resources, and she does, and it's one of the few episodes where her self-belief is validated in a completely unambiguous way rather than being complicated by reality. She needed it, so did we. And then there are smaller episodes, the ones that don't have high concept premises, the episode about Hank trying to get Bobby to love football, the episode about Dale's elaborate underground bunker being invaded by possums, the episode where Boomhauer goes on a date and we briefly get to see a social interaction from his perspective, the episode where Cotton and Bobby watch a terrible war film together and Cotton explains, in his specific way, what the film gets wrong and what war was actually like. That episode contains some of the show's best Cotton Bobby material, and the image of an 80-year-old man and a 13-year-old boy watching television together and having a real conversation is quietly one of the most affecting things the show ever produced. Good episodes of King of the Hill are the kind you think about after they're over. Not because they were complicated or demanded analysis, but because they showed you something real, and you needed a moment to sit with it. That's the mark, I think. Sit with it. Now let's talk about the show's legacy and what it's actually been doing all this time. Fox's mandate for their animated series in the late 90s was no character development, no story arcs, episodes should be self-contained for syndication. Judge and Daniels quietly ignored this mandate during the show's early years. They did it carefully, in small increments, in ways that could plausibly be argued away if anyone was paying attention. And the result is a show that, in strict technical compliance with the rule, doesn't have character arcs, and in actual practice has more genuine character development than most contemporary dramas. This is the first thing to understand about what the show was doing. It was working around its constraints rather than within them. The constraint was commercial and practical. The workaround was the accumulation of small individual moments that added up across years of watching to something that felt like growth. The creative tension at the heart of the show's DNA, which I mentioned in the first section, is worth returning to here. Judge wanted grounded social and cultural humor rather than overt socio-political jokes. Daniels wanted character depth and emotional context. The show that resulted from this tension is, I think, better than either of them would have made alone. The socio-political dimension, Hank's conservative worldview colliding with the changing world, gives the show intellectual content and cultural relevance. The character depth gives you a reason to care about the collision rather than just observe it. What the show is doing politically is quite unusual. It is not mocking Hank for being conservative. It is also not endorsing his conservatism uncritically. It is presenting a specific worldview held by a specific person, showing you where that worldview works and where it fails, and trusting you to draw your own conclusions about it. This is harder to do than it sounds because the path of least resistance in this territory is either to make the conservative a figure of comedy, which flatters liberal viewers and alienates everyone else, or to make him a wholesome, salt-of-the-earth figure, which flatters conservative viewers and alienates everyone else. The show does neither, and the result is a show that people across the political spectrum have been able to see themselves in. The Hank Hill was right discourse that emerged online in the years after the show ended is interesting in this context. It tends to identify specific episodes where Hank's position turned out to be the correct one, where his instincts about quality or integrity or personal responsibility were vindicated by events. And it's not wrong about those episodes. Hank is right about things. He is also wrong about things. The discourse sometimes overcorrects from the initial reading of him as simple conservative target, but the corrective impulse is real and the underlying observation is sound. The Su Pu Nu Sin phone storylines deserve more attention than they usually get in discussions of the show. They do something more than use Khan as a comic foil for Hank's cultural limitations. They depict a real experience of immigration and assimilation, and the particular frustration of being educated and accomplished and still being misread, still being asked where you're really from, still finding that the social capital you've accumulated in one context doesn't translate to another. Khan's arc, which ends with him having something like genuine respect from Hank, is about the slow attrition of mutual prejudice through proximity and time. John Redcorn's storyline touches on Native American land rights in a way that goes beyond background color. The casino storyline, his already owning land, being scammed into opening an illegal casino in Texas and then being unable to continue gaming there because of the state's prohibition on Indian casinos, reflects real situations that real Native American communities have navigated. The show doesn't belabor this, but it knows it. The show's treatment of working class life is, I think, its most significant quality and probably its least remarked upon one. Almost everyone in A.R. Len works, with a few notable exceptions. Hank is an assistant manager at a small propane company and is proud of it. Bill is a sergeant barber in the Army. Dale runs a pest control business. Boom, how A.R.'s professional life is mysterious but not lavish. The Hills house is modest, the alley is between houses, not in the back garden of a mansion. The show takes working-class suburban life seriously, not as something to pity, not as something to romanticize, just as the actual texture of most people's actual lives. This was unusual in 1997 and remains somewhat unusual. American television is substantially oriented toward aspirational economics. The characters on television tend to live in apartments and houses that their jobs cannot possibly support, in cities that require more income than most characters demonstrably have. King of the Hills A.R. Len is sized correctly for its characters' incomes and social positions. It is an act of discipline, and it makes the show feel more real than most of its animated contemporaries. The show won 2 Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Animated Program during an era when those awards were heavily competitive and The Simpsons was still a significant force. This is a measure of the industry's recognition of quality, though Emmy success and actual cultural quality don't always track exactly. In this case, the recognition seems justified. The internet's relationship with King of the Hill has been interesting to watch. The show went into its gap period with a respectable reputation and emerged roughly 15 years later, amid a passionate cult following of defenders. A lot of this is the streaming and syndication effect. The show became available to people who hadn't been watching it in 1997, and people who encountered it fresh in their 20s or 30s found it hitting differently than they might have expected from a cartoon about a Texas propane salesman. A particular moment in the show's internet life came with the meme period. King of the Hill became meme material in a specific way that speaks to something the show was doing. The characters translate well into images with text because they are specific and recognizable. A still of Hank saying, "I tell you what," in a particular tone communicates something that doesn't need explanation. A still of Dale looking suspicious communicates something. A still of Bill looking sad communicates something. These are characters whose emotional registers became shorthand in internet culture, which is its own form of cultural penetration. The comparison to The Simpsons was made in almost every review of Koth's early seasons and was not always made fairly. They are doing different things. The Simpsons is bigger, stranger, more satirically ambitious, more cartoonishly exaggerated. King of the Hill is quieter, more specific, more psychologically realistic, less interested in the absurd. They share a time period and a network and an animated format, and essentially nothing else. The comparison was always more about context than content. The show's influence on subsequent animated comedy is harder to trace than its specific cultural impact, partly because the things it did well are hard to directly imitate. You can't just decide to be specific about character and have it work, any more than you can just decide to be funny and have it work. But there is a lineage of post-King of the Hill animated comedy that takes the show's approach seriously, that tries to build characters with real psychological depth, rather than just comic archetypes. The revival being as well received as it was. A 98% critical approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, a reception nobody was taking for granted, suggests that what the show was doing still works, that the specific texture of AR Lens still reads, that Hank Hill's particular quality of being a good man with real limitations is still interesting, that the alley and the beer and the lawn and the propane still have meaning for people, which is really all you can ask of a show about anything, that it still means something when you come back to it. The question of how the show handles time and change is worth dwelling on, specifically how it depicts Hank Hill in relation to a world that keeps shifting around him. Hank is uncomfortable with change. This is a known character trait. But the show is careful about what kind of discomfort this is. It is not rage, it is not resentment exactly. It is more like the feeling of someone who has worked out how things should work and keeps finding that the world hasn't got the memo. It is the discomfort of a person who was told, explicitly or implicitly, that if you did the right things in the right way, things would work out correctly, and who keeps discovering that this is not quite how it goes. This is, in fact, the experience of many people, not just conservative people. Anyone who built their expectations of the world on a model that doesn't quite match the actual world. The show uses Hank's conservatism as the specific form this takes for him, but the underlying human experience is not politically exclusive. What changes in Hank across the run of the show is not his values. He doesn't have a conversion experience. He doesn't decide he was wrong about the things he believed. What changes is his definition of who those values apply to, his definition of what counts as doing it right. His definition of what that boy ain't right means when the boy in question turns out to be full of genuine ability and genuine goodness, just configured differently than expected. This is, if you squint at it, a fairly conservative idea of how good change happens, not through revolution or rejection of the past, but through slow, accumulated adjustment. And it's also a fairly universal idea of how change actually happens in people who are fundamentally resistant to it. Hank doesn't decide to change. He just keeps having experiences, and the experiences build up, and gradually the shape of him is slightly different. Years later, after all of it, that boy ain't right is still Hank's instinct about Bobby. But the weight of it has shifted. It sounds like love now, more clearly than it ever did. The show's legacy, finally, is not in the awards or the viewing numbers or the meme economy. It's in the specific thing it made, which is a portrait of a place and a set of people that is so particular and so honest that it generates genuine feeling in the people who encounter it. Not everyone. Not everyone finds King of the Hill. Some people find it too slow, too low stakes, too uncomfortable in the way that reality is uncomfortable. But the people who find it tend to find something in it that stays with them. The internet's specific relationship to King of the Hill is worth spending a moment on because it's a bit unusual. The show became meme material in a particular way that not every television comedy does. Stills from it circulate with text captions, characters' expressions serve as reaction images, specific phrases from the show have entered the vocabulary of people who may never have watched it in full. This kind of cultural penetration generally happens to shows that are either extremely popular or extremely specific, and Koth is both. It was popular on first run and became more specific in retrospect, as the people who love it tend to love it in a precise way, knowing individual episodes and specific moments rather than having a general positive feeling about it. The Hank Hill was right meme ecosystem is part of this. But there's also a broader phenomenon where the show gets discussed as a document of a specific American moment, the suburban Texas of the late 90s and early 2000s, with its particular relationship to tradition and change and community. The show wasn't trying to document that moment, it was trying to be funny and to tell human stories. But it was specific enough in its setting and its characters that it accidentally became a record, and records become interesting as time passes. There's something I find genuinely moving about the show's treatment of ordinary work, which I want to name before we leave this section. Hank Hill takes his job seriously. His work at Strickland Propane is not ironic to him, not something he tolerates to fund what he really cares about, not a placeholder. He sells propane and propane accessories, and he considers this a calling. The show respects this completely. It never winks at the camera about whether propane sales is a worthy vocation. It simply shows a man who cares about what he does and does it with integrity and treats this as a form of dignity rather than a form of comedy. That, more than anything, is what I think the show leaves behind, a picture of ordinary work as meaningful, of modest life as sufficient, of decent people as interesting. These things are harder to depict than they sound, and the show made them look easy, which is the greatest possible compliment to what Judge and Daniels built. That's the legacy, the staying with you. Now let's talk about what happened when it came back. In January 2017, at SF Sketchfest in San Francisco, Mike Judge and Greg Daniels and several members of the original cast performed a table read of the King of the Hill episode Husky Bobby in front of a live audience. They'd been talking about doing a 20th anniversary event. They set it up, and the audience's reaction was not what you get when people are nostalgic about something they used to love. It was what you get when people are actively invested in something they still love. The difference is audible, apparently. Judge and Daniels looked at each other. The idea started taking shape. They had preliminary talks with Fox about bringing it back. Fox wasn't interested. This is the decision that will be pointed to for years as the canonical example of a network not understanding what they had, which is slightly unfair because Fox's calculations in 2017 about the viability of reviving a canceled animated series were not unreasonable, even if the specific decision turned out to be wrong. Hulu was building an animation library. Hulu was interested. In January 2023, it was official. King of the Hill was coming back. The gap between the announcement and the air date was substantial. The WGA strike of 2023 affected production, paused the writing process, and added delays. Greg Daniels confirmed in an interview that the revival was still in development and would move forward once the WGA strike officially ended. The revival was pushed back to 2025. And then it arrived, all 10 episodes of Season 14 on Hulu on August 4, 2025. The bittersweet context of the revival is real and should be acknowledged. Brittany Murphy, who voiced Luann, died in December 2009. Tom Petty, who voiced Lucky, died in October 2017. These absences were anticipated and prepared for. How Luann and Lucky fit into the post-Gap world is handled off-screen, their fates not directly addressed, which is probably the most dignified available approach. Johnny Hardwick, who had voiced Dale Gribb Bull across the entire original run and was scheduled to return for the revival, died on August 8, 2023. He was 64. He had, before his death, recorded his lines for 6 episodes of Season 14. The episodes he completed feature his voice. The remaining episodes feature Toby Huss as Dale Huss, who had played Cotton and Con throughout the original series, stepping into the role with an informed familiarity with the character. Jonathan Joss, who had voiced John Redcorn since the show's early seasons, was shot and killed on June 1, 2025, just hours before the premiere of the revival's first teaser campaign. He had been posting on Instagram that morning. There's a video of him walking around Austin talking about having recorded lines for the revival, and was killed in a confrontation outside his home in San Antonio later that day. He had recorded 4 episodes. The revival carries these absences alongside the rest of its context. The episodes dedicate moments to the memories of Hardwick and Joss. The production continued because that's what productions do, and because the people involved in it wanted to honor what they'd built together. Where is everyone now in season 14? Hank and Peggy have been working in Saudi Arabia. Hank was running a propane operation at an Aramco base, a manufactured American community, the kind of place designed to feel exactly like the American suburb he came from, maintained in a state of artificial comfort. Greg Daniels described it as the completely idealized American picket fence existence that Hank essentially got to live for the years he was there. And then he came home to the actual AR Len and found that it had changed. The gap between the idealized version and the real one is the emotional territory season 14 opens in. They are now retired, or trying to be. The question of what Hank Hill does with himself when he doesn't have a propane company to manage is a real comedic and dramatic question, and the show apparently takes it seriously. Hank Hill has been defined by his work for his entire adult life. What is he without it? Dale was briefly the mayor of AR Len. He won the mayoral election with 9% of the vote. In a field of many candidates, he was technically the plurality winner. He held the office for 36 hours and then resigned, explaining that he had no faith in a system that would allow someone like him to become mayor. This is one of the season's more perfect details, Dale's conspiracy theorist paranoia about systems and institutions coming back around to produce a moment of accidental self-awareness. Bill has been a shut-in since COVID. This is exactly as expected. Bill DOH Trave, the man most suited by temperament and circumstance to the experience of prolonged isolation, has isolated. The question is whether season 14 and beyond pull him back out into the world, or whether this is the new configuration of Bill. Boomhauer is in a relationship and helping raise his girlfriend's teenage son. For the entire original run, Boomhauer was the alley's perpetual bachelor, the one whose romantic life was extensive and short-term, the one who seemed most thoroughly free of domestic entanglement. The revelation that he has, in the intervening years, settled into something that looks like a family is one of the revival's more substantial character evolutions. Bobby is 21 and working as a chef in Dallas. He runs a Japanese-German fusion restaurant. He lives with Joseph. He is, by all available evidence, exactly who you would expect him to be at 21. If the show's 13-season argument about who Bobby E. Hill is turned out to be correct. He found his thing. He is doing his thing. He seems happy. Connie is studying engineering at UT Dallas. Joseph has continued to grow into someone who is more like Dale than like either of his biological parents. The younger generation of AR Len characters are adults now, navigating the world on their own terms. The season 14 reception was, to put it plainly, remarkable. It earned a 100% critical approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is an unusually high consensus for anything. The show was streamed for hundreds of millions of minutes in each of its first several weeks on Hulu and Disney+, eventually passing 1 billion hours streamed in 2025. Hulu ordered a season 15 before the premiere aired, and then in October 2025, they announced renewals for seasons 16 and 17, and an order for 20 additional episodes beyond those. King of the Hill is, as of this writing, a going concern. It is in production. It is returning to AR Len for multiple more seasons. The 15-year gap is over. There is something about the reception of the revival that I find particularly interesting, which is that it wasn't primarily driven by nostalgia. The show didn't get the response it did because people were happy to see old friends again and willing to overlook quality issues for the sake of goodwill. The critical response suggests that the show came back in good form, that Judge and Daniels had something to say and a way to say it, and that AR Len in 2025 has as much to offer as AR Len in 1997. Toby Huss noted in a Variety interview that the country had made a turn toward Dale in the intervening years, that ideas which were on the fringe of even Dale's conspiracy worldview are now mainstream in various corners of public discourse. This is an observation that can be made without particular political editorializing. The culture has shifted in ways that mean Dale Gribb Bull's position relative to the mainstream has changed. He was always out there. He's slightly less alone out there now. Hank Hill, returning from Saudi Arabia to an AR lens that has changed, is also, of course, not a neutral image. It is a specific image of American return, the experience of coming back to a home you remember one way and finding it has moved on, or moved sideways, or just become different in ways you can't entirely account for. This is a broadly relatable experience, and the show is well positioned to explore it without reducing it to political argument. What King of the Hill does, as it always has, is show people their lives reflected back at them with enough specificity to feel real and enough generosity to feel kind. That is what it came back to do. And from the evidence of season 14, it is still doing it. One detail from the revival that I particularly liked is the framing of Hank's Saudi Arabia years. The Aramco base in Saudi Arabia where he and Peggy lived is depicted as essentially a preserved American suburb, a place built to look like a Texas neighborhood similar to A.R. Len, implying an earlier version of home without the drift and change that the actual A.R. Len has undergone while they were gone. Hank thrived there, presumably. Everything was the way he expected it to be. The rules were clear, the community was orderly, and then he comes home to an AR Len that has changed, that has different businesses and different demographics and different energy, and discovers that the idealized version he was living in was a manufactured comfort rather than the real thing. This is a fairly sharp observation about nostalgia and about what it costs to live inside a preserved version of the past, the cost being that you miss the actual present happening around you. Hank Hill, who values authenticity above most things, spent years living in the most artificial possible version of the world he loves. There's a comedy in that, and the show apparently finds it. The detail that Dale was briefly the mayor of A.R. Len is the revival's best single fact, and I don't think it can be overstated. Not because it's outlandish. Dale winning a mayoral election against a large field of candidates with 9% of the vote is entirely plausible, given how fractured and strange local politics have become, but because of what he did with it. He held office for 36 hours. He resigned because he had no faith in a system that would elect him. This is probably the most self-aware thing Dale Gribb Bull has ever done, and it arrives completely in character. He didn't resign because he felt unqualified. He resigned because if the system produced this result, something must be wrong with the system. The alley is still there. The beer is still cold. The lawn still needs mowing. I want to say one more thing about the revival, specifically about what it means to come back to something you made a very long time ago. Judge and Daniels are older now, substantially older. The characters they made in the mid-90s were drawn from their experiences of specific people and places, and now they are returning to those characters as different people, filtered through 30 more years of life. The Mike Judge who made the original series was a man in his early 30s who had recently left the Texas suburbs. The Mike Judge returning to the series is in his 60s and has had several decades more of life to bring to the characters. The version of Hank Hill, who returns to A.R. Len in season 14, is presumably older in ways that matter. Not just that his character has aged visually, but that the things he's been through in the gap are real to the people who wrote him. The frustrations of retirement, the experience of leaving a place and then coming back to find it changed. The particular quality of being a certain age and finding that the world has continued without you and is not quite as you left it. This, I think, is why the revival works as well as it apparently does, because the people making it are now the age of the characters they're returning to. They have closed some of the distance between themselves and Hank Hill. They understand from the inside now rather than from the outside what it is to have spent your whole life taking things seriously, and to find that the things you took seriously are still there, but everything around them has changed. Judge said at the ATX Festival panel that making the original show felt like they used to say it was, "Andy Griffith is back and he's pissed." And now, with the revival, that formulation still applies, but the pissed quality is earned differently now, not from the outside, from a position of comedic observation of a certain type of man, from something closer to the inside. There's also something worth saying about the particular losses the show carried into the revival. Brittany Murphy, Tom Petty, Johnny Hardwick, Jonathan Joss. Tom Petty and Johnny Hardwick are real people who are part of the thing and who are gone, and whose absences the show has to navigate. The show navigates them in different ways: the off-screen departures of Luann and Lucky, the split performance of Dale between two voice actors, the limited but present final work of Joss as Redcorn. And these navigations all carry weight. Making something across 28 years means that the people who were part of making it at the beginning are not all still there at the end. This is true of most long creative projects, but it is felt differently in animation than in live action, where the aging and loss of a cast is visible in the work. In animation, the characters remain unchanged while the people behind them change and age and die. The voice becomes the bridge, and when the voice goes, the bridge goes, and the character must find another way forward or retire. King of the Hill has chosen to continue, to carry its losses and keep going, to put Hank back in AR, Len and Dale back in the alley, and Bill back across the street, and Boomhauer somewhere nearby with his girlfriend's son, and to do the thing the show has always done, show you ordinary people trying to be decent in an ordinary world. This seems right, more right than stopping would have been. The show is alive, and that's, I think, where we should leave things tonight. King of the Hill is a show about very small stakes that somehow managed to feel like real stakes. An episode about the wrong kind of lawn fertilizer, about a competition between propane and charcoal, about whether a man can admit he can't shoot a rifle. These things shouldn't generate genuine feeling. And yet they do, because the show is populated by actual people, and actual people's actual stakes tend to be small and also to matter enormously to them. Hank's lawn is not just a lawn, it is an expression of everything he values about how to live. Cotton's shins are not just an injury, they are the armature around which his entire identity was built. Bill's divorce from Lenore is not just a failed marriage. It is the line between everything he thought he was going to be and everything he actually became. The small things in King of the Hill are not small, they are just specific. They have been made small through the relentless fidelity of the depiction, and then they expand, once you've been watching for a while, into the full size of the things they actually are. We've covered a lot of AR Len tonight. The creation of the show in the mid-90s set it in a fictional town based on suburbs of Dallas. The physical world of Rainy Street and the alley and strict land propane. Hank Hill and his complicated relationship with propane and with his son, and with the version of himself that Cotton never quite approved of. Cotton himself, who lost his shins and killed Fittymen and died with Peggy right there at his bedside. The alley and what it actually is, which is a kind of love that doesn't need to name itself. Dale and his aliases and his conspiracies and his obliviousness or possible non-obliviousness about the thing that is most obviously happening in his own home. Bill and the bulldozer and the long aftermath of Lenore. Boomhauer and the thing we didn't know about him until the last moment of the last episode. Nancy and John Redcorn and the long affair that everyone in AR Len knew about except Dale. Peggy and her Boggle championship and her terrible Spanish and her genuine heart. Bobby, who ain't right, who is the rightest person in AR Len. And then Luann and Lucky with his Tom Petty voice, and Con and Min and Connie and their complicated aspirations. Buck Strickland and his serious heart event. The alley in the evening with the beer, with the nothing much happening. The show came back in 2025. It is apparently still itself, still AR Len, still these people, still the small, specific things that turn out to be the large things once you've sat with them long enough. I find that genuinely reassuring that you can leave something for 15 years and come back, and it's still recognizably what it was. If you're still listening, you have been sitting with AR Len for several hours now. Or perhaps you fell asleep somewhere around the boom, however, section when we were talking about the speech pattern, and you've been drifting for the last while with the voice somewhere in the background. Either outcome is fine. The lore will be here tomorrow. The particular comfort of King of the Hill as sleep content is, I think, connected to something specific about how it handles time. Nothing in AR Len is urgent. Problems get resolved, more or less, by the end of 22 minutes, and then tomorrow is another day of propane and lawn and alley and beer. The rhythm is slow and seasonal and consistent. You know where you are in it. You know these people. You know the alley will be there when you wake up. There's also something restful about a show that believes in ordinary decency, that takes it seriously, that doesn't treat it as naive or as insufficient. Hank Hill believes that if you do your job well and treat people honestly and maintain your lawn properly and show up for your friends, things will generally be okay. This is not always true in life. It's not always true in the show either. But the show holds it as a value worth trying for, and there is something deeply calming about spending time in a world that believes in trying. So, sleep well, dream of propane if you want to. The lawn will still be there in the morning. Hank is back in AR Len. The lawn still needs mowing. The alley is still there. That's probably enough for